Welcome to part 9 of What If Kushina Survived on the Night of the Nine Tails Attack Naruto x Hinata x Yugito. Please make sure to like and subscribe as it motivates me to upload more in the future, and as always link to the fanfiction is in the description. Chapter 81. Naruto simply stood there looking down at the lifeless form of Uchiha Itachi. It was very strange. He felt satisfied, but also just the tiniest bit sad. He looked at his katana. He wouldn't have to wipe it down as the rain had already washed away the blood. He put it back in its sheath. You did it. Naruto looked up to see Yugito approaching. Yeah, I guess I did. Are you all right? I'm fine, she assured him. I wasn't actually wounded, just tired and I recover fast. Naruto simply nodded. He knew something about that. He reached down and without ceremony slipped the ring off Itachi's right hand and placed it on the ring finger of his own. To the victor go the spoils. Yugito was a bit surprised but not offended. Cloud Nins regularly searched the bodies of dead enemies, and sometimes dead allies too. Naruto turned to her. I wear 2 pieces of jewelry. He grinned. When I marry Hinata-chan I'll wear 3. From beneath his clothes and armor he pulled out his necklace and displayed it to her. This is the Shodai's necklace. It was made for the Shodai Hokage, the founder of my village. He gave it to his granddaughter, the Lady Tsunade. She gave it to me on my 13th birthday. She always believed that it was cursed and that anyone who wore it who was not destined to be Hokage would die. She told me it was proof of her belief that I would be Hokage one day. He paused and had to choke back some of the raw emotions from the memory. For me this is a constant reminder not only of her but of everyone I love and everyone I want to protect. He slipped the necklace back beneath his clothes. He held up his right hand. This is a reminder of the enemies that will always be there to threaten me and those people I love. Together they will remind me of everything good and bad in my life. She slowly nodded. I see. Naruto looked up into the sky. I think it's finally starting to lighten up a little. But I can't write a scroll until it stops. He performed a jutsu and a clone appeared. The clone carefully picked up Itachi's body. Kabuto is still out there somewhere. Let's go find the others. XXXXXXXXXXX. It took a while, but eventually the full team was reunited near the southern end of the valley. Jiraiya was still unconscious, but Hinata assured everyone that he would recover. Kiba and Akamaru had already been patched up and were fine. The fact that Kabuto might still be alive was disappointing. Everyone was stunned to see the corpse of Itachi. Except for Orochimaru, he was the worst traitor the village ever knew. Kakashi said. And our squad put them both in the ground. Kiba said proudly. Hinata noticed that Naruto didn't look especially happy. Are you all right, Naruto-kun? He nodded and gave her a weary smile. I'm glad that I killed him, no regrets there. But he was a great ninja and I respected him, even though I hated him. There is nothing wrong with respecting a worthy adversary. Kakashi counseled. And whatever else he was, Itachi was definitely that. Well, at the very least it means this mission was definitely worthwhile. He had other thoughts on his mind. Hinata-chan, tell me about this ninja who attacked Jiraiya. I don't think he was trying to attack him. Hinata said carefully. He just seemed frightened and desperate to get away. If he'd already been attacked by Itachi and Kabuto, it's understandable if he was feeling desperate. Kakashi said. It doesn't excuse what he did. Kiba responded. Maybe, but it does explain it. Kakashi replied. Well, if he was trying to get away from 2 Akatsuki, I don't blame him for attacking first and asking questions later. But the fact is that if Akatsuki is interested in him, I am too. He paused. He might just be a Jinchuriki. You think so? Yugito asked curiously. Naruto nodded and looked at her questioningly. Have you ever heard of a Jinchuriki that matched Hinata-chan's description? No, the only other ones I've heard of were you and Gaara. And that was only after the Battle of Konoha when it became public knowledge. There's surprisingly little information available about the Biju. I know, Naruto sighed. But if this guy is Jinchuriki, we have to find him before Akatsuki does. The sky above them was finally beginning to clear. It looks like it stopped raining. Kiba, do you think you could track him? No chance in hell. Kiba shook his head. There isn't a trace of his scent left to go on. He began to chew on his lower lip. We could try and track him by following his trail. But that might take a good while. About how long? Naruto asked. No telling, Kiba answered. Days, maybe weeks. If he can whistle up a rainstorm whenever he wants, it might be real hard. Naruto thought for a moment. All right, I'm giving you a Nissan and A-rank mission. Track this guy down, no matter how long it takes. But don't confront him. When you find him, contact me. If he really is a Jinchuriki, we need to handle him with care. Kakashi and Kiba both nodded. What about me, Naruto-kun? Hinata asked. Hinata-chan, I need you to return with me and the rest of the group. I want you to take care of Jiraiya while he recovers and to hurry the process along if you can. She nodded, more than happy to stay with Naruto. With the rain finally stopped, Naruto took out a pair of blank scrolls and got to work, sealing Itachi into one and Hinata, Yugito, and Jiraiya into the other. He shared some last-minute words with Kakashi and Kiba and watched them leave. Shortly before disappearing himself in a flash of yellow. XXXXXXXXXXX. Uchiha Ryuki waited patiently in the common room of his home. With him was his daughter, his sister-in-law Makoto, and the 5 elders of the clan. Ryuki was careful not to reveal his impatience or his annoyance. The door to his home opened and in stepped the Hokage and the blonde cloud ninja who was always near him these days. Naruto was dressed in full Hokage regalia today, and he looked quite serious. Ryuki and the others all bowed to their leader. Welcome to my home, Hokage-sama. Ryuki intoned with just the right amount of deference in his voice. Naruto carefully returned the bow. Thank you for inviting me into your home and for agreeing to this meeting on such short notice. Ryuki provided a false smile. I am always at your service, Hokage-sama. As you can see, everyone you requested is present. Could you now inform me what the purpose to this meeting is? Naruto nodded slowly and took a scroll out from beneath his robes. Ryuki-san, I have come here today to inform you that the missing nin and outlaw Uchiha Itachi is dead. Naruto paused as there was a round of gasps. None of them had been expecting that. He saw that Makoto looked especially shaken. He had specifically requested that she be present as a mercy and sign of respect. He felt that as both his mother and the wife of the father Itachi had murdered, she deserved to be among the first to know. Ryuki was the quickest to recover from the shocking news. When did this happen? And to whom do we owe our thanks? I killed him less than 2 hours ago. The details will have to remain secret. I hope you understand. Of course, Ryuki mumbled. Naruto killed Itachi. And without the Kyuubi's power. Ryuki was certain that once this became known, his reputation would rise even higher, as Kakashi's had after slaying Orochimaru. Naruto still held out the scroll. Out of respect to the Uchiha clan, I have returned his body. You may do with it as you wish. Every eye was immediately drawn to the scroll in Naruto's hand. You mean his body is sealed within that scroll? Ryuki asked carefully. That's right. Ryuki took a step back. Could you please show us, Hokage-sama? You mean right here? Naruto's eyes darted to Makoto, who seemed to be getting paler by the second. He had expected to simply hand over the scroll and depart. He'd thought for sure that Ryuki would want to see the body somewhere in private. Are you certain you want to see it right now? He looked uncomfortably towards Makoto. The body is not in pristine condition. The body was blood-soaked with a huge gash in the chest and back. Naruto hoped the man would take the hint and not insist on doing this now. Gabella reached over and put a comforting hand on her aunt's back. Father, maybe it would be best if. I think we would all like to see the truth sooner rather than later. Ryuki answered without noting his daughter's protest or his sister-in-law's obvious distress. Please show us, Hokage-sama. He glanced again at Makoto, but nodded. As you wish, Ryuki-san. He spread the scroll on the floor. Release. And with a puff of smoke, the body of Uchiha Itachi appeared. He was still dressed in the black robe with red clouds. His eyes were shut and his hands were at his side. He would have seemed asleep except for the dried blood and the tear in his clothes. Makoto wailed and slumped down to her knees. Slow and bitter tears began to fall from her eyes. Gabella wrapped her arms around her shoulders and tried to offer her some comfort. Ryuki and the elders simply looked on. They seemed, if anything, to be satisfied. I am sorry for the pain this has caused, but I thought the Uchiha clan would want the body returned. Naruto said quietly. Makoto looked up at him and nodded. No, I thank you, Hokage-sama. I know my son did terrible things and that your killing him was justice. At least this way he will be put to rest with his family. No, he will not, Ryuki said sharply. He is a disgrace to the Uchiha name. He murdered his own father, my brother. He will not receive burial with his clan. His body will be burned like rubbish and his ashes scattered to the four winds. Both Makoto and Gabella looked up at him in horror. The clan elders nodded their agreement with Ryuki's judgment. "Ryuki, please, I beg you." Makoto cried out. "Let him be buried with his family. I know he did terrible things in his life, but he has paid for them. Can you not show mercy? For my sake if not for his." Ryuki stared at his sister-in-law who was still on her knees by her dead son. "How can you even ask that? Have you forgotten Fugaku?" he demanded. "I am certain my husband has forgiven him, and would want his oldest son to rest in the earth with his kin." "No." Ryuki shook his head violently. "For his father's murder and his many other crimes there can be no forgiveness. You granted Sasuke burial despite his crimes." Makoto pointed out. "That was different," Ryuki insisted. "Sasuke went mad. What he did was tragic, but you cannot blame a man for going mad any more than you can for falling sick." Naruto had a very different opinion on that, but held his tongue. Itachi deliberately chose to abandon this village and break his oaths. Every crime he committed was done of his own free will. He is a disgrace to the Uchiha name and I will not permit him to be buried in the Uchiha cemetery even in an unmarked grave. The words were harsh and spoken without an ounce of give-in. Hearing them, Makoto broke down completely. She threw herself upon Itachi's cold chest and simply wept. Gabella looked at her father pleadingly. "Please father. For Aunt Makoto's sake can't we show just a little bit of mercy this one time? Itachi is gone, what difference does it really make now?" Her father frowned at her. "The difference is that being buried with his clan and ancestors is a sign of honor. And for his crimes I will not grant him any such honor even in death. My decision is final." Gabella switched her attention to Naruto. "Hokage-sama, please allow him to be buried even if it's not with the clan. The Hokage has returned his body to the clan and given us charge of it." Ryuki said sharply. "It is no longer his decision." The truth was that with Itachi's death Naruto's desires for revenge were satisfied. What happened to the body had never mattered to him. He would have been willing to allow a burial in an unmarked grave if it helped Makoto. But he shook his head. "I am sorry Gabella, but Ryuki-san is correct. I have returned the body to the clan. I cannot simply go back on my word." With that there was nothing left for Gabella to do but to try and comfort her aunt. XXXXXXXXXXX. Naruto managed to leave shortly thereafter. Well, that was uncomfortable. Naruto muttered on the way back to the tower. "You did the right and honorable thing," Yugito stated. "It is not your fault things went as they did. You know, I think I'd rather fight another life or death battle rather than go through that again." Yugito nodded sympathetically. It's not easy to tell a mother her child is dead, even if he was deserving of his fate. XXXXXXXXXX. Ryuki wasted absolutely no time in having his order carried out. Itachi's body was wrapped in bed sheets and carried out to a quiet corner of the Uchiha district. There pieces of wood were gathered and the body was drenched in kerosene. A few Uchiha ninja kept the rest of the clan at a distance. Only those who had been present during the meeting were permitted to witness the impromptu funeral pyre. Makoto wept openly while everyone else looked on in silence as the body was slowly burned down to nothing but ashes and a few pieces of bone. XXXXXXXXXXX. "Auntie," Gabella spoke pleadingly. "Is there anything I can do for you?" After the things he'd done, Gabella had no affection left for her cousin. It was only for her aunt's sake that she had wanted a different ending. Makoto shook her head. "No dear, there is nothing you can do." She rubbed her eyes and gave her niece a tired smile. She reached over and gave her a gentle hug. "You are a kind girl Gabella, do not ever change." She let go and began the walk back to her home. "Will you be all right, auntie?" Makoto nodded. "Of course." She hesitated and then continued. "Do you know that I wish I had been more like Kushina?" "You wanted to be a kunoichi." Makoto shook her head. No, she had a son who was considered to be a genius ninja who had to endure much worse growing up than either of my sons did. Yet somehow not only did he reach his full potential, he did so while being happy, while still being able to smile. I had two sons who were considered geniuses, and look what happened to them. I failed them both. That wasn't your fault, Gabella insisted. Itachi and Sasuke made their own decisions. You're not to blame for what they did. Aren't I? She said quietly. I couldn't keep Itachi from being rushed straight into the Anbu. I couldn't keep him from feeling all the pressure of the clan's expectations. I couldn't keep Sasuke from being slowly poisoned by his hatred. I wasn't even able to have his curse seal suppressed. And I could not even have Itachi buried. I failed them both. She began to walk away. Again, Gabella stood there and watched her go. She had no idea how to comfort her poor aunt. I would like to speak to you, daughter. She turned to see her father frowning down on her. Well, I really don't want to talk to you. Ryuki frowned. If you are serious about becoming clan head one day, then you should know that it requires you face difficult decisions with unwavering firmness. Do not imagine that you will only have easy choices to make. Why couldn't you have allowed a burial for Aunt Makoto's sake? Even if it had to be in the public cemetery. Had I allowed such, it would have been seen as a sign of weakness on our part. Itachi disgraced our clan name. We had to be seen as washing our hands of him completely. Even when it breaks Makoto's heart. She demanded. Yes, her father answered without the slightest hesitation. My concern is for the clan as a whole, not for individual members. And besides, his voice dropped off. Besides what? Her father hesitated. Besides what? I want to know. He paused, but finally answered. She raised him as well as Sasuke. Obviously mistakes were made. She glared openly at her father. You blame her for what happened to them. He shrugged. Not all of it, certainly. Both Itachi and Sasuke were responsible for their own actions. But obviously she was too weak to instill proper discipline in them. Oh, so I suppose she should have made them feel worthless and weak instead of trying to give them love. She spoke bitterly. She knew all too well what her father believed children needed. In his mind, a parent's job was to push their child without mercy to achieve, even to the point of rejecting them. And if you want to portion blame, how about blaming Uncle Fugaku for denying Itachi a real childhood? And why don't you take some blame for preventing Sasuke's curse seal from being locked away? Or do you think the curse seal helped his mental state? Livid, she stormed away to avoid screaming at him. XXXXXXXXXX. Makoto finished the small bottle of sake. She set the bottle down and turned off the water. The tub was full and the water was nice and hot. She carefully settled into the tub. From the side of the tub she looked at the framed picture. It was of her and her husband and their 2 small sons. Sasuke was a year old and Itachi was 9. Everyone in the photo was smiling. By that time Itachi was already a ninja and had his Sharingan. He had become more and more serious, but had not yet stopped smiling. Everyone in the picture had a smile. They were a happy family. Makoto stared at the photo and wondered how it had all gone so wrong. They had all been happy once. How could things had ended the way they did? She had loved them so much, her husband and her sons. All she had ever wanted for them was that they be happy. She had never cared if they were ninja or not. The family in the picture seemed like a normal one. How had it gone so wrong? She shut her eyes and wept for her children and her husband. She had done her best for them, she truly had, but it had clearly not been enough. And now that Itachi was gone, she was tired of it. From the tub's edge she took a sharpened kitchen knife. With great care she sliced down the middle of each forearm, letting the blood flow. It hurt, but not too much. She set the knife down and closed her eyes as the water in the tub darkened. She knew this would hurt Gabella and many others, and she was sorry for that. But her own pain was too much to bear any longer. Now that Itachi was gone, there was nothing left holding her to this life. As her mind slowly drifted and her strength faded away, she remembered playing with her little boys as her darling husband smiled at them. If Kami was merciful, she prayed that would be her afterlife. Chapter 82. The funeral took place 2 days after her death. Though not a ninja, she was an Uchiha and so was buried in the clan cemetery beside her husband and near her son Sasuke. More than 100 people came in their mourning clothes to lay down a flower and say goodbye. Most of the mourners were the non-ninja of the Uchiha clan. They were part of the majority who could not activate their Sharingan. These were the members who lived within the Uchiha compound as shopkeepers, tradesmen, or merchants. They were part of the silent majority that the shinobi of the clan tried to ignore as much as possible. They took pride in their family name, but lived quiet lives that had nothing to do with fighting or power. Among the ninja of the Uchiha clan, only 2 had chosen to attend. Ryuki felt it would be unseemly for him not to attend the funeral service of his sister-in-law. As clan head, he spoke the eulogy with a certain dignity, if not with great warmth. Gabella stepped forward to place her flower and whisper a silent prayer for her beloved aunt. Her Aunt Makoto had never said a harsh word to her. She'd offered Gabella support even when her own father had turned his back. After putting the flower down, she returned to her place beside Haku. He offered her a comforting smile and silently took her hand in his. She was so grateful for his presence. There were only 3 other non-clan members present for the service. Kushina, Naruto, and Yugito each came forward to pay respects. When the service was complete, Gabella left with Haku. On the way, she stopped to share a few words with some of the other mourners. She did not speak to her father. XXXXXXXXXX. What do you think you are doing? Hinata asked sternly. Nothing. Despite his best efforts, Jiraiya sounded completely guilty, of course. The fact that he was in his hospital gown about to jump out the window didn't help. Hinata hurried over to the window and slammed it shut. She then turned to face the Sannin. Jiraiya, I want you in that bed right now. A huge smile blossomed on Jiraiya's face and he let out a perverted little giggle. Well, all right, but don't you want to shut the door first? Hinata blushed a deep crimson and let out an embarrassed squeak. Is something going on in here? A calm voice inquired. Neji entered the room with his trusty cane. Not yet. Jiraiya teased. Jiraiya. Hinata shouted angrily. Jiraiya held up his hands defensively. I was just teasing Hinata. Hinata shook her head and tried to get over her embarrassment. I've told you before, you'll need to stay here at least 3 weeks to let those burns fully heal. I feel just fine. I'm just going to go have a little sake and maybe do a little research. I promise I'll be back later. Jiraiya tried to sound reassuring. By the way, Hinata was frowning. He could see didn't believe a word of it. Perhaps I can help, Neji said. Without warning, he activated his Byakugan and jabbed 2 fingers into 6 points of Jiraiya's lower back. Then caught him as he fell over. What the hell? Jiraiya shouted in an obvious panic. What did you do? I can't feel my legs. Neji put him back in his hospital bed. The effects will wear off in a few hours. Now please behave yourself, Jiraiya-sama. I would hate to have to do this to you every day. XXXXXXXXXXX. Thank you for your help, Neji. He grinned and nodded. You're welcome, Hinata. Since becoming a medic nin, Neji had discovered that his place in the world was not really so terrible after all. Helping those who were truly suffering had helped him to finally find some peace. He had a place of honor and was needed. How is Tenten? Hinata asked. As Neji had learned to smile again, he and Hinata had finally healed old wounds and become close. For her, Neji had finally become the protective big brother she had always wanted him to be. She is out of the village on a mission at the moment. Is everything still all right with the 2 of you? Neji chuckled, a sound that was no longer tinged in bitterness and sarcasm. Well, she's still willing to put up with me, so I guess that means everything is fine. Actually, things were much better than just fine. They'd been dating for over 2 years and were very happy together. Hinata was about to say something more when she suddenly stopped. She slapped both hands over her mouth and bolted down the hall for the nearest women's room. XXXXXXXXXX. Neji waited patiently outside the door. He could hear the sound of his cousin retching. When she finally emerged several minutes later, she'd washed her face but was still shaking a bit and seemed paler. Are you all right? Neji asked. Hinata quickly nodded and gave him a weary smile. I must have had some bad sushi. Well, let me check you just in case. He performed a simple diagnostic jutsu. He quickly found the cause of Hinata's illness. His eyebrows leapt up. Then, looking at his cousin, a knowing smile appeared. Congratulations. She gave him a confused look. Is it the sushi? That got a chuckle out of him. No, it's not the sushi. She waited, but he just continued to grin at her. Aren't you going to tell me what it is? He shook his head. I think you should perform a self-diagnostic and see the cause for yourself. She found it rather odd but went ahead. When she found out, her jaw dropped. Oh. Neji let out a full laugh and actually gave Hinata a warm hug. Becoming a healer had really changed him. Oh indeed. XXXXXXXXXXX. Gabella was lying naked on top of her lover. Her head was resting on his chest and she could hear the comforting sound of his heartbeat. After the funeral, she'd needed this. She'd needed him to make love to her. Needed the feel of him inside of her. Needed his love and his touch to remind her that she was truly alive. So they'd cast a pair of henges and rushed to one of the cheap hotels they so often visited. Now they were just lying together in bed relaxing. It's June 1st and my birthday is on the 10th. Gabella suddenly spoke. I know. Haku replied calmly. I have to make a decision. I know. I love you and I want to be with you. I know. She lifted her face to look at him. I'm pregnant. I know. There was a momentary pause as her words actually penetrated. Then he suddenly bolted upright. What? When he sat up she was tossed to the side of the bed. She could see the shock and panic in his face. Though she knew it was wrong she began laughing. Sorry, I was just joking there. I'm not pregnant. Why would you joke about something like that? I just wanted to hear you say something besides, I know. Grumbling a bit he lay back down. She looked over at him curiously. What would you do if I really was pregnant? He turned over onto his side so they were both face to face. I would ask you to marry me again and beg you to help me form my new clan. And what if I told you I wanted to remain an Uchiha? What would you do then? She asked curiously. He hesitated for a moment, then answered in a low voice. Then I guess I would become an Uchiha. Really? She said in surprise. Every time I've asked you've been adamant against joining my clan. That's because I want our children to be raised outside of your clan's rules and pressures. He spoke seriously. Think about Alyssa for a moment. When she was a hostage she was treated with love and made to feel like a part of the family. Now she is training to try and become a ninja. Yet she is treated in exactly the same manner, no better no worse. And if she were to fail to become a ninja I have no doubt that Kushina-sama, Naruto, and the rest of the clan would still love her and see her as family. Would the Uchihas do the same? Gabella shook her head. The answer to that was obvious. If she had the ability to mold chakra and somehow failed to graduate the academy she'd be disowned. Haku nodded. He knew as much from everything she had told him about her clan. I want my children raised like Namakazes not like Uchihas. Then why would you agree to join my clan? She asked. I would only agree if my child was going to have to be born into the clan no matter what. I won't abandon my son or daughter. She looked at him. Family is more important to you than power, isn't it? She asked quietly. He stared at her. Of course it is. Nothing in this world is more important than being with those who love and need you. She nodded and leaned in to kiss him. I know. XXXXXXXXXX. Naruto sat at his desk in his office at the tower. He was between appointments and had time to ponder something that had been bothering him. He is 6. That was what Itachi had said about pain. It had been a warning obviously, but Naruto had no idea what it meant. 6 what? Naruto wondered. 6 years old. 6 feet tall. 600 pounds. He had an image of some child prodigy who had freakishly grown into a 6-foot-tall round ball bigger than any Akamichi. He then tried to imagine said prodigy beating the crap out of Uchiha Itachi. The image that formed in his mind was comical to say the least. He purged the idea from his thoughts. When Jiraiya was feeling a bit better he would talk to him and see if he had any ideas. He'd held off on saying anything as yet. He was worried the man would suddenly disappear to try and find info. Once he had healed from his wounds Naruto would talk to him about pain being 6 and about him having the Rinnegan, whatever that was. There was a knock on his office door and Shizune popped her head in. Naruto, do you have time to see Hinata? She says she has something important to tell you. Naruto smiled. I always have time for her. Hinata entered his office with a noticeable spring in her step. She went over to him and immediately plopped herself down in his lap. She leaned in and gave him a sweet kiss. Naruto smiled as he wrapped his arms around the girl he loved. Hinata-chan, is there something you actually needed to tell me? Or was that just an excuse to come in here and have your way with me? He smirked a bit. Because I'm fine with either. She giggled a bit and gave him another kiss. When she pulled her lips back she looked very happy and very excited. Actually Naruto-kun, I have to inform that I can no longer perform in missions above D rank. Nani? That caught him by surprise. She had once forced him to promise that he would not try to protect her. She wanted to go on missions with him, no matter how dangerous they might be. Why the sudden change, Hinata-chan? You're not hurt, are you? He asked a bit worriedly. She shook her head. I'm not hurt, Naruto-kun. The reason I can't go on any more serious missions is because of the 77th rule of ninja conduct. The 77th rule. She gave him another kiss. You do know that one, right? Of course, I memorized all 120 rules of ninja conduct. Let's see, he needed a second. To safeguard the future of the village, no kunoichi may perform any mission above D rank or be placed in any hazardous situation once it is confirmed she is with. Naruto suddenly halted and his jaw dropped. With child. Hinata finished for him happily. I'm going to have a baby. Chapter 83. Yugito was at her normal spot standing just outside the Hokage's office door. Hinata had just gone in to speak with Naruto. Shizune was just standing there. Smiling. Something unusual going on? Yugito asked. Shizune looked over and shook her head. No, it's just nice to see those two together. I've known both of them their entire lives and it just makes me happy to know that they'll always be together. I suppose they do make a nice couple. Yugito said neutrally. Before Shizune could reply there was a thump from within the office. Followed immediately by Hinata's shout of Naruto. Shizune and Yugito looked at each other and immediately opened the door. Standing there the two of them saw Naruto lying unconscious on the floor behind his desk. Hinata was kneeling over him. What happened? Shizune and Yugito both hurried over to them. Hinata looked up. Well, he fainted. She looked a bit embarrassed. He fainted. Shizune quickly knelt down as well to check on him. I gave him some news that, I guess was too much of a surprise. Hinata replied nervously. Yugito stood there and silently observed. He fought an S-rank missing nin completely blind without the slightest hesitation. What could she have possibly said that could overwhelm him like this? Naruto came to momentarily. Opening his eyes he saw both Hinata and Shizune kneeling over him. He immediately sat up and glomped onto Hinata. Hinata-chan, we're going to have a baby. Yugito lifted an eyebrow. Well, I guess that would do it. Seeing his exuberance and simple joy, Hinata could only laugh happily and return his embrace. Yes, we are Naruto-kun. After receiving congratulations from Shizune and Yugito, Naruto got back on his feet and performed a jutsu. With a large puff of smoke 50 clones were packed in the office. All of them of course were in the Hokage robes. They all let out a shout and began to stampede out the office doors and window. Naruto, what are you doing? Shizune asked nervously. Naruto was standing there with Hinata firmly in his arms. I want everyone to know the good news. Hinata giggled into his chest. He had always been excitable and eager to share his happiness with others. That was one of the things she had always loved about him. Shizune was frowning. Naruto, do you really think it wise to do that? Of course, he replied with a huge smile. I want everyone to know. What could possibly be wrong with that? XXXXXXXXXXX. A few hours later, Naruto and Hinata were walking home together hand in hand with Yugito a few steps behind. All the way home people on the street stopped to applaud and congratulate them on the news. The walk took them much longer than usual as they were forced to halt many times. Older women insisted on giving Hinata advice and special home remedies that they all swore would help her over the next 9 months. Some women gave her special charms that they insisted would help her conceive either a boy or a girl. Many small children came up to them offering hand-picked flowers along with their happy wishes. Naruto and Hinata both very much enjoyed the attention. As they approached home they were both loaded down with tokens and with flowers. They were both in a very good mood. Right up until they saw Hiyashi and Kushina waiting for them at the gate. Kushina was trying to look severe, but could just not keep the smile from her face. Hiyashi however had no trouble looking stern. Seeing the way Hiyashi was looking at him, Naruto gulped. XXXXXXXXXXX. You are completely lacking in restraint and self-control. Hiyashi glared at the two of them. Hi, Hiyashi-san. Naruto answered respectfully. And do you not think that such important news should have been shared with the family before it was announced to the entire village? Hiyashi demanded. Yes, Hiyashi-san. Naruto felt like squirming. He was sitting on a couch with Hinata while Hiyashi lectured him about proper behavior. Even though he was still in the robes of the Hokage, he thought it safer to just sit there and let Hiyashi rail at him. The truth was he felt like a 10-year-old who'd been caught doing something wrong. Do you know how I found out I was going to have a grandchild? I was lecturing Hanabi about her lack of focus when one of your clones ran past shouting that you were going to be a father. Now I ask you, is that the way a man should learn such a thing? No, Hiyashi-san, and I apologize for that. From his seat he bent at the waist to give a slight bow. I was just so excited I wanted to share the good news with the whole village. Hiyashi nodded curtly. And what of the village? What will they think knowing what their Hokage has done? Father, Hinata spoke up. They are very happy for us, just look. She kept one hand in Naruto's while the other pointed to a nearby table that was covered in flowers and cards. Those were gifts that had been left outside the main gate to the Namikaze estates. Obviously the villagers share our joy at the good news. She has a point, Hiyashi. It's not as if people are upset by this. Kushina said. Clearly most are pleased to know their Hokage will have an heir soon. Kushina had been standing beside Hiyashi the entire time trying to wipe the amused look from her face and failing miserably. It was obvious that she was not upset in the least. Hiyashi turned to her and frowned. But now they all know that this has occurred before they were even married. Kushina chuckled. I think the world will somehow continue even so. They have been betrothed for over 2.5 years now and have always been close. Surely what has happened is not that shocking, is it? Especially since you did give permission for her to stay here. She gave Hiyashi a knowing grin. He tried his best to look shocked. When I agreed to that it was so she could assist Naruto with all his new responsibilities as Hokage. I never imagined that they would behave as they did. Oh really? Kushina sounded more than a little amused. So did you and Hana wait until your wedding day? With those words a rare sight occurred as Hyuga Hiyashi actually blushed. Father? Hinata asked, sounding shocked. That has nothing to do with this. Hiyashi insisted quickly. Kushina nodded. Fine, but then let's stop torturing the children. This is not the first or last time a child was conceived out of wedlock. She turned a sharp eye to both Naruto and Hinata. So long as the child is not born out of it there should be no real problem. Hiyashi slowly nodded. Though it is far from ideal, I suppose that is true. He turned to the two of them still sitting nervously on the couch. Your wedding will be moved up to July. That is the earliest that new arrangements can be made. Naruto looked over to his love. Is that all right with Hinata-chan? Hinata in turn looked to Kushina. Will we still be able to use the rose garden? Kushina smiled and nodded. Of course dear. Then as long as everyone can still attend I'm happy to get married sooner. She turned to Naruto. Is it all right with you Naruto-kun? Will you be there? He asked. She giggled and nodded. I don't think it would be much of a wedding without the bride present. He gave her a huge smile. Then it's fine with me. Hiyashi nodded. Now as both of you will still only be 15 we will require a special decree to make the ceremony legal. Fortunately, I don't think there will be a difficulty getting the Hokage to issue one. XXXXXXXXXXX. That night there was a huge celebration at the Namikaze estates. Family and friends all came to congratulate them. XXXXXXXXXXX. I'm really going to an aunt. Alyssa said excitedly. Naruto smiled at his little sister and nodded. You sure are. You'll have to be a role model and help protect your little niece or nephew. After all, the baby is going to look up to you. Alyssa's eyes widened. She suddenly turned around and began to leave. Alyssa-chan, where are you going? Naruto called after her. I'm going to train some more. She called back. I need to be as strong as I can to help protect the baby. XXXXXXXXXXX. Hinata was surrounded by most of her female friends. All of them were eager to make suggestions about baby clothes and about designing the baby's room. Ino, Tenten, Tamari, Gabriella, Tayuya, and even Enko encircled her. XXXXXXXXXXX. The Hokage's chief advisor approached him with a grim look. Thanks a lot Naruto. Shikamaru grumbled. Naruto looked at his friend in surprise. What did I do? Well, thanks to you now all Tamari wants to talk about is having kids. So, you're already marrying her. Weren't you two planning to have kids? Yeah, eventually. Shikamaru stressed that word. The plan was for us to have one girl and then one boy. Hopefully after us having a few years to get settled into married life. Now all of a sudden she wants a big family and wants to start having children immediately. Man, this is troublesome. Oh come on Shika, it can't be that bad. Tamari came bounding over and grabbed Shikamaru by the arm. Come on lazy, let's find an empty room so you can knock me up. As she was dragging him away Naruto saw him mouth the words, help me. XXXXXXXXXX. Kushina was staring at a mirror. She leaned in close and looked at her reflection. No gray hair, check. No obvious wrinkles, check. She took a couple steps back, firm athletic body, check. She let out a sigh. I am still way too young to be a grandmother. Wasn't Naruto a baby in my arms just a little while ago? Where did the years go? She would love the child with all of her heart. She was overjoyed to know that Naruto and Hinata would be having a family of their own soon. She just wished there was some way to have grandchildren without becoming a grandmother. XXXXXXXXXXX. All the conversation came to a screeching halt as a man with spiky hair and a sake bottle in each hand stumbled into the living room. He was dressed in nothing but a hospital gown. Naruto, congratulations. I'm sure the two of you will make fine parents. Jiraiya lifted one of the bottles he held and drank a toast. Pervy granddad, what are you doing here? Naruto demanded. Kid, how many times have I told you not to call me that in public? Anyway, how could I not come here to celebrate your impending fatherhood? And like I'm really going to miss the chance to get free sake. Jiraiya, how did you get out of the hospital? Hinata demanded. Neji's attack finally wore off. After that, leaving was easy for the great Toad Sage. Naruto just shook his head and then ran through some hand signs. 4 Kage Bushins took hold of him and picked him up. All right granddad, time for you to get back to the hospital and I'm putting you under Anbu watch until you're released. Despite his protests, Jiraiya was soon on his way back to Konoha Hospital. XXXXXXXXXXX. As the evening wore on, the two of them got the chance to dance together, which was something they thoroughly enjoyed. They were not the only ones on the dance floor. XXXXXXXXXXX. They look very happy. Gabella commented as she moved slowly in Haku's arms. Haku nodded. They are lucky. They love each other and they know that they are always going to be together. She looked into his eyes. I want that too. He looked back into hers. More or less than you want to lead the Uchiha clan. She opened her mouth, but no words came to her. He nodded, and held her closer. Let's just dance, he whispered. Without a word she placed her head back on his shoulder in silent agreement. XXXXXXXXXXX. Yugito stood by the far wall trying to be unobtrusive as she looked at the happy couple dancing. A familiar voice spoke to her. Why so sad, Yugito-chan? I'm not sad, she thought. I am very happy for them. Naruto is a good man and Hinata loves him very much. You are happy, Yugito-chan, but you are more sad. Why? It's nothing important, this is just how humans feel when they give up a dream, even if it is a silly dream. Why give up, Yugito-chan? If you like him, go and get him. That may work for cats but not for people. He is happy, I would like to see him happy. Besides, he is the Hokage of this village and I am merely his bodyguard. I am not even a ninja of this village. What am I supposed to say to him? That I like him? Foolishness. Yugito heard the low meowing that she knew was Nibby's version of laughter. You humans are the foolish ones. Reasons are unimportant, logic is unimportant, all that matters is what you feel. With that she felt Nibby's presence fade away. She remained where she was and kept an impassive front. She watched as Naruto and Hinata danced. It was easy enough to see how truly happy they were. She really did like him. Naruto had accepted her in a way that no one in her home village ever had. She respected his courage and his strength and admired his ability to just accept others for who they were. Yes, she did like him. But she would never tell him. She would not embarrass him by making him aware of her ridiculous crush. XXXXXXXXXXX. They were lying in bed together. He put his hand gently over Hinata's perfectly flat stomach. So in 9 months we'll be parents? Naruto asked. Hinata put a warm hand over his. In about 8.5 months, yes we will. To Naruto the thought that he was going to be a father was still amazing. In many ways it was more incredible to him than being Hokage. But what it really meant was that in 8.5 months he would have a new precious person in his life. Someone he would love with all his heart, and someone he would give his last breath to protect. One more reason why I can't fail, why I won't fail. I have to stop pain no matter what, even if it costs my life. Chapter 84. The rain was pouring down. Kakashi was looking up into the endless gray sky. He let out a depressed sigh and looked over to his teammate. I don't suppose. Kiba didn't say a word. He just turned to Kakashi and glared. Right, Kakashi muttered. They'd been pursuing their target for 2 full weeks now through the wilderness. Throughout that time it had been raining almost constantly. Which meant that Kiba's nose was useless. Which meant they had to track him the old-fashioned way. Which was not helped by the rain either. They had long since left river country and were now in the middle of bear country headed north. Man, I hate being stuck in all this damn rain. Kiba muttered. A weary Akamaru whimpered agreement. He looked hopefully over to Kakashi. You know we've been at this for quite a while now. He said hopefully. Kakashi smiled from beneath the mask. We sure have, and we'll probably be here a while longer. Unless you want to run home with your tail between your legs. Kiba grimaced. I'd never do that, but we still aren't really close to catching up to him yet. Kakashi sighed again. He really wished it would stop raining. Not only would that let them pick up the scent, but he would actually be able to pull out his favorite reading material. I know you're frustrated, Kiba, I am too. But we have a mission. I've had missions end in failure and have called some off when the situation was too dangerous. But I've never just given up. So long as we still have a trail to follow, we'll keep pursuing him. Looking disappointed, Kiba still nodded. Right. XXXXXXXXXX. Soshiku sat in the damp grass and pressed his back against a tree. Why wouldn't they leave him alone? All he wanted was to be left alone and allowed to live in peace. But they kept chasing him. He looked up as a large gray wolf approached him with a fat rabbit clamped in his jaws. The wolf approached slowly and then dropped the rabbit meekly before him. With a smile, Soshiku reached out and rubbed the top of the wolf's head. The wolf growled appreciatively. Good boy, thank you. He wished people would treat him as well as the wolves did. But they were always cruel. All of them, except for Mother. He picked up the rabbit. He couldn't start a fire in the rain, but he usually didn't bother with that when there weren't people around. He bit down and tore off a nice big piece and began chewing. XXXXXXXXXXX. Pain's image watched as the gigantic turtle disappeared from sight, the last of its chakra absorbed. We are done now, Pain informed them. He looked to Deidara and Sasori, the only ones physically present at the location. Well done, both of you. Now we have only 2 remaining. Sasori grumbled. We're not leaving the 5 tails to Kabuto and Tobi, are we? Yeah, that would be a disaster. Deidara agreed. Deidara-senpai, you are hurting Toba's feelings. Tobi sounded like a kicked puppy. Yeah, well, too bad. Yeah, the only thing you're good at is running around. Sasori snorted, and your partner is almost as worthless. I think we may have made a mistake in promoting him to full membership. Kabuto's image pushed up his glasses. With respect, Sasori-sama, had the force from Konoha not arrived, we would have certainly captured the 5 tails. That you allowed your partner to be killed and yourself to be so badly wounded proves your weakness. No other group of the Akatsuki would have failed so miserably. Sasori stated. The rule is that each member is responsible for capturing 1 Biju or Jinchuriki. Pain stated calmly. Do you suggest we abandon that policy? Pain was surprised to see Sasori nod. I do. When we set that rule there were 9 to be captured and we still had Itachi, Kisame, and Orochimaru as members. So much has changed since then, we should change the policy and assign whatever team would best be able to capture the target. If we change the rule now, who gets the chakra from the demons? Kakuzu demanded. The 7 senior members of Akatsuki will each receive the power of one of the tailed beasts. Pain calmly lied. Pain, Konan, Deidara, Sasori, Haiden, Kakuzu, and Zetsu all calmly accepted that. Tobi merely shrugged. What about me? Kabuto demanded. You have done nothing to warrant the power of a Biju. You may remain a member of this organization, for now. I will decide at a later date who will receive the power of the 8th demon. Kabuto's astral form looked exceedingly unhappy, but did not argue. Yeah, so are we doing this? Deidara asked. Pain glanced in Toba's direction and noted a subtle hand sign. We shall alter the rules. Within the next few days I shall select the team that will pursue the 5 tails. And what of the 2 tails? Sasori demanded. That decision shall have to wait until after the 5 tails has been acquired. For now let us all get some rest. He ended his own jutsu and blinked out. A moment later Konan's image was gone as well. XXXXXXXXXXX. Pain and Konan found themselves once again in their secret base. They both stretched a bit. I'm starving, Konan declared. How about I make us some beef stew? Pain nodded. After 3 days without eating he was ravenous. That sounds fine. With a slight smile she headed to the kitchen to make dinner. XXXXXXXXXX. Father, can I talk to you? She stuck her head into his study. She was most surprised to see someone sitting there with him. Ryuki looked up from his desk and smiled. Of course, dear, he turned to his guest. A young and fairly handsome-looking boy, he looked a bit like Sasuke. Sigh, we should continue our talk at another time. Of course, Ryuki-sama. The boy stood and bowed to him. I look forward to it. As he passed her, the boy gave her a false smile that was more than a little creepy. Who was that? Gabella asked as she shut the door and sat down. No one of any importance, her father answered with a deft smile. Well, my dear, tomorrow is the big day. You'll be 18, are you excited? Yes, but not because of that. She looked nervous. Ryuki gave her a knowing smile. You've finally come to your decision, haven't you? He chuckled a bit. And none too soon. This has been a very hard choice, father, my heart has torn in half. I want to do what is right for my clan, but also what is right for him. I honestly thought he might agree to join Uchiha, but he never changed his mind. Ryuki nodded. That is a shame, dear, his Kekkei Genkei would have made an incredible addition to our own. She frowned. His bloodline has nothing to do with it. Father, I love him. He simply nodded. Yes, I know that. Love is a wonderful thing, especially when you are young. But marriage must always serve the greater needs of the clan. She looked at him. Did you love my mother? Ryuki nodded. I did, I loved her very much. But had she been a common woman who could not mold chakra, I would not have married her. Even though you loved her. Ryuki shrugged. I wanted to be sure all my children would be able to achieve Sharingan. Well, I know how true that is, she muttered. Her father looked at her carefully. So daughter, what is your decision? Will you marry for love or the good of the clan? XXXXXXXXXXX. Kushina was quite surprised when Gabella turned up at her door. Is something wrong, dear? Kushina asked. Gabella shook her head. Is Haku here? I need to talk to him. He is upstairs in his room. Kushina gave her a knowing grin. You do remember where that is from your last visit? An embarrassed blush colored her cheeks. Hi, sensei, I do. She hurried up the stairs before Kushina could say anything more to her. After a quick knock, she was in Haku's room. He was more than a little surprised to see her. Is something wrong, Gabella? I wasn't expecting to see you until the party tomorrow. She hurried over and put her arms around him. Ask me to marry you again. What? She looked up into his face with pleading eyes. I know you've asked me 6 or 7 times already, but please ask me just once more. He spoke slowly and carefully. Gabella, will you marry me? Yes. She leaned forward and kissed him. And before you even ask, yes, I'll help you found the Mamashi clan. For the next few minutes the two of them simply kissed. All the worries and pressures of the last few years forgotten. What finally decided you? He whispered to her as he ran a hand through her soft black hair. Haku, she spoke quietly. If I lost my Sharingan, if I were not kunoichi, and could not mold chakra, but everything else about me was still the same. Would you still love me? Of course, he answered without the slightest hesitation. She looked back up into his eyes and kissed him. That's why I choose you. XXXXXXXXXXX. You know, kid, I could have left a lot sooner. Despite his boast, Naruto noted that Jiraiya was being just a bit wary as he sat down. When it comes to injuries, I trust Hinata-chan. Naruto said simply. You two have a date yet? Naruto nodded. July 2nd, Hiyashi really didn't waste any time. Neither did you, kid. Jiraiya teased and was rewarded by a look of embarrassment on Naruto's face. I'll be sure to be back here for the wedding. You are having an open bar, right? Naruto sighed. Before we go there, pervy granddad, I wanted to see if you could help me with something. Have you ever heard of the Rinnegan? And in a flash Jiraiya's good humor was gone. Where the hell did you hear about that? From Uchiha Itachi, right before he died. Jiraiya looked very interested. How did he know about it? He told me Pain had it. Jiraiya's eyes seemed to expand as the blood drained from his face. Oh, Kay, what exactly is the Rinnegan and why do you look like you've swallowed a frog? Jiraiya slowly began to tell Naruto a story. A story about 3 young orphans that he ran into while in the Land of Rain back in the days of the Third Great Ninja War. He's been with his old squad mates Orochimaru and Tsunade. The 3 children were named Yahiko, Konan, and Nagato. Orochimaru and Tsunade had both insisted there was nothing to be done about 3 orphans who were but a drop in a sea. Orochimaru had even offered to kill them as an act of mercy. For some reason Jiraiya had decided to actually stop and give the children training. Then one night Yahiko and Nagato both ran away. I found them as they were being attacked by a rock nin. Yahiko was wounded. To save his friend I saw Nagato activate his Rinnegan. It was a dujutsu that somehow gave him the ability to wield all 6 elemental chakras. All 6? Naruto interrupted. I thought that was impossible. So did I, but he did it. After that I gave the 3 of them as much training in ninjutsu as I could, enough to at least make them solid genins. I then returned to my travels. I told them we would meet again when they became adults. What happened to them? I thought they had all died during Rain's civil war. Well, apparently at least this Nagato is still alive. Naruto said. Jiraiya shook his head. It can't be him. It's impossible. He was a sad child and absolutely hated the idea of killing. Yahiko was actually the one with the fiery spirit. He might be capable of being Akatsuki. But not Nagato. Naruto shrugged. People change, pervy granddad. Jiraiya shook his head. Not like that, Nagato was too gentle a soul to be capable of the things Pain has done. Well, at least I know about the Rinnegan now. I don't suppose you have any idea what his being 6 means. Not a clue, sorry. He stood up and headed for the door. Just as he got to it there was a yellow flash and Naruto was standing in front of him. Where do you think you're going? Jiraiya came to a sudden halt. I'm heading to the village hidden in the rain to find Pain and see whether or not he really is Nagato. Naruto stared at him disbelieving. No, you're not. Look, kid, if it really is Nagato then I owe it to him to try and help him if I can. He's a student of mine and I owe him at least that much. Naruto shook his head. I don't care if he was your student. He's our #1 enemy and a ninja powerful enough to beat Itachi easily. I don't want you anywhere near him until I'm ready to bring all my forces to bear on him. Until I say so. Rain country is off limits and the village hidden in the rain is especially forbidden territory. Jiraiya grinned and began a shunshin. You know what they say, kid, anything worth wanting is usually forbidden. Jiraiya, as the Hokage I am giving you a direct order not to go there. Jiraiya laughed. Good one. If you go there I swear I'll ban the sale of all Ika publications and shut down all the public baths. Jiraiya froze. You wouldn't. Try me, Naruto dared. I lost Tsunade and I'm not losing you too. I don't care whether he's your old student or not. He's too dangerous for you to take on alone. I want a promise from you that you'll stay clear of Rain country. Jiraiya slowly nodded. All right, kid, I'll stay clear of Rain, for now. It okay with you if I get back to my information gathering? Naruto nodded curtly. Just so long as your spying doesn't take you anywhere near the borders of AIM. Yes, mother. Jiraiya disappeared. XXXXXXXXXXX. The following day, Kiba looked up into a clear blue sky. I can't believe it. It's actually stopped raining. Kakashi was just as amazed. Let's not waste it, have you got his scent? Kiba stood there for a moment simply sniffing the air and concentrating. Then he suddenly barked out a laugh. I got him. Lead the way. The 2 of them quickly got moving. XXXXXXXXXXX. Soshiku was sick of running. He sat at the top of a hill calmly eating an apple and waiting for his pursuers. When they finally showed up he was going to kill them. Chapter 85. Kiba stop. Kakashi called out. Huh. He and Akamaru came to a halt. Why? We're almost on top of him. Kakashi nodded. I know. He took out a kunai and sliced his thumb. He then performed a summoning. A small dog puffed into existence at his feet. Pakun, please go to Naruto and tell him we've finally found the ninja we've been tracking. Got it. Pakun disappeared in a puff of smoke. Hey, Kiba complained. We don't need Naruto for this. We can take care of this guy ourselves. Maybe, Kakashi replied. But that's not what the Hokage wants. He told us to contact him once we'd found him. Kiba took a deep sniff and looked upwards. Well, I hope he gets here quick. It looks like rain. Above them clouds were gathering. XXXXXXXXXX. Naruto was sitting at his desk looking at what Shizune had just brought him. 40 million. Naruto glanced up. That's less than what Kakashi got for killing Orochimaru. Shizune shrugged. Well, Orochimaru had a much longer career. What will you do with the money? Nothing. He put the check down on his desk. I have plenty of money already. I'm not going to bleed the village for something I did in the line of duty. Not all of the bounties on Itachi were put up by the village. Shizune pointed. A sudden smile touched Naruto's lips. Say, by any chance was any of this put up by the Uchiha clan? He tried to sound innocent. Shizune grinned as she could read his mind. I believe they put up 10 million of it. Well, that I'll accept. I mean, I wouldn't want to offend them or anything. Shizune giggled a bit and smiled. Well, heaven forbid we offend the Uchiha clan. At that moment Pakun appeared on the desk with a puff of smoke. Naruto, Kakashi sent me to let you know they've finally caught up to the ninja they were chasing. Great. Naruto began pulling off his Hokage robes. He had on his usual body armor and the Uzumaki battle dress on underneath. Yugito, he shouted. She popped her head in. Yes, Hokage-san, we're going to talk to the ninja Itachi and Kabuto were chasing. He looked back over to Shizune. She had her arms crossed and did not look pleased. I really don't like you doing this, Naruto. You're the Hokage now, you shouldn't be leaving the village to perform missions. She said. Well, I'm the only one who can perform the Hiraishin, so I sort of have to. He tried giving her a winning smile. I'm really sorry I have to go. No, you're not, Shizune said flatly. He shook his head, feeling a bit embarrassed. You know me way too well, Aunt Shizune. He performed a quick jutsu and a single clone appeared. Here, I'll leave a clone in case there's an urgent status report that needs to be signed and stamped. He looked at Yugito. You ready to go? She quirked an eyebrow. Don't you have to put me in a scroll first? Not when it's only one person. Naruto reached out and took a hold of her hand. I can bring one person with me if I have physical contact with them. It does use up more chakra, but it's not too bad. At the feel of his hand gently holding hers, her heart skipped a beat. It said something about her life that even such a small amount of human contact was enough to affect her. In her mind she heard a teasing voice. Ooh, he's touching you, do you like it? Shut up, she thought back in annoyance. Naruto looked at her a bit closely. Yugito-chan, are you feeling alright? You look kind of flushed. She couldn't help but feel self-conscious, not only with Naruto's attention but the considering looks from Shizune as well. I'm just fine, thank you. He looked at her for just a little bit more and then finally nodded. Hand in hand they disappeared with a yellow flash. XXXXXXXXXXX. This is so not a good idea. Kiba said and Akamaru barked agreement. Look, I don't want to fight this guy unless it's absolutely necessary. Naruto replied. That's a noble sentiment, Naruto, but given what he did to Jiraiya, don't you think it would be better for us to approach him as a group? Kakashi said. Naruto shook his head. If we do that he'll probably see it as an attack and we'll probably have to fight him. So instead you and Yugito are just going to walk right up to him? Kakashi questioned. Just giving him a nice easy target. It's the best way to show him we're not trying to attack him. When he sees that he should think we're non-hostile. Naruto said. Unless he just thinks you're really, really stupid. Kiba muttered. Naruto looked at him. I heard that. Good, Kiba replied. Naruto sighed. For right now, please just watch and keep a safe distance. If a fight does start then please come in and back us up. Naruto and Yugito headed towards their target. XXXXXXXXXXX. Soshiku had picked up the two new scents drifting in on the wind. So 4 ninjas were coming for him. He had faced worse odds. At least the one with the red eyes wasn't one of them. He shuddered at the memory of that fight. He had only escaped by unleashing a full torrent of lightning into the area all around him. It had been the closest he had ever come to being captured. Without conscious thought his hand drifted to the spot above his heart where his seal was. Not for the first time in his life he thought about how he seemed to be well and truly cursed. Not only because of the demon inside of him but because of his own nature. He loved the freedom or just running wild with the wolves. The problem was that no matter how hard he fought it, his nature was to be human, not a wolf. Eventually, after enough months, he would start to get lonely. When that happened he would find a small village or town and try to just live a normal life, doing odd jobs and trying to just fit in. Sometimes it was a disaster from the start. Sometimes it would be, not bad. He always tried very hard to please and was a solid worker. Occasionally people would appreciate that. There had even been a girl once, she'd had gentle green eyes and light brown hair. He couldn't remember her name anymore, but her scent was seared into his memory. She had liked him, she had been nice to him. And for a little while he thought he might be happy. But then the hunter nins found him. Like they always did when he stayed in one place too long. His hands clenched into fists. Why? Why couldn't they ever leave him alone? He would live a quiet life and never bother anyone. But they wouldn't leave him alone. His mind snapped back to the present. He was surprised to see only 2 ninjas just jogging towards him. The other 2 were still pretty far away. They weren't hunter nins, they didn't have the masks. Just like the ones with the red clouds, they weren't chasing him to try and bring him back to Iowa. But the ones with the red clouds had still attacked him. These 2 were friends with the ones that had been chasing him for so many days. Above him the sky was dark and there was lightning ready to be formed. He hadn't started the rain yet or the lightning, but it was ready. He breathed in their sense. These 2 were different, he could tell. He didn't let himself hope for even a second that they would be anything but enemies, but he was curious. XXXXXXXXXX. Naruto and Yugito were walking up the hill, the guy was watching them from the top of it. They were about 50 yards from the top when a pair of lightning bolts slammed down in front of them. That's far enough, the stranger called down. He looked them over carefully. You, he looked at Naruto. You smell a little of fox. He looked at Yugito. Smells strongly of cat. Yes, Yugito replied. And you stink of wolf. Naruto suddenly felt left out and wondered why he hadn't been able to sniff out Gaara back when he still had the Kyuubi. My name is Naruto and this is Yugito. I am the Hokage of the village of Konoha. Naruto paused. Could you tell me your name? The ninja shrugged at him. It's Soshiku, what do you want? Why have your friends been following me all this time? I've come to offer you my protection and the protection of my village. Naruto answered. I don't want your protection. Soshiku stated. High above them the sky suddenly filled with lightning as thunder boomed ominously. Now leave me alone. I could leave you alone, Naruto called out. It was starting to rain. But I'm afraid Akatsuki won't. They were the ones who attacked you, the ninjas in black robes and red clouds. They are a powerful organization who are gathering up all the Jinchuriki in the world. They mean to extract the demon you hold, which will kill you. They have great resources and are absolutely determined to achieve their goal. They will never stop coming after you. To Naruto's great surprise, Soshiku's reaction to this dire news was just to shrug indifferently. So what? I've had Iowa hunter nins chasing me since I abandoned my village. They'll never stop either. You're from Iowa? Naruto asked in surprise. That's right, Soshiku replied. I never knew that Iowa had a Jinchuriki or that he had become a missing nin. Naruto said. Well, if it makes you feel any better, the rock nins didn't know that Leaf and Cloud had Jinchuriki either. And I don't think the Tsuchikage would ever admit his secret weapon had betrayed him. Do you mind if I ask you why you did that? Naruto questioned. Once again Soshiku shrugged as if to say it wasn't important. I was kept in a secret Anbu base, always under watch and isolated from the rest of the village. I was too valuable to release and too dangerous to be given any sort of freedom. The Anbu and everyone else treated me like I was a rabid wolf who might turn on them at any second. The only person who actually cared for me was my mother. She could have abandoned me, but instead she stayed with me in that secret base enduring the same abuse that I did. My mother loved me, and growing up she was the only good thing in my life. He let out a long painful breath. When I turned 10, the Tsuchikage, in his wisdom, decided that his secret weapon needed to be completely heartless and cold. So one day some Anbu came and told my mother to say goodbye to me and leave. She refused to desert me. So, to teach me a lesson, they killed her right in front of me. They wanted to show me that the Tsuchikage had to be obeyed no matter what, that he could not be defied. Soshiku smiled suddenly, a jagged painful smile. I taught them a lesson of my own, that some things cannot be forgiven. I leveled that base and killed every person in it, and then I ran away. He looked at Naruto coldly. If I wouldn't be a weapon for my own cage, I certainly won't be one for you. Naruto's heart went out to Soshiku. He could not imagine what it would feel like to see his mom killed in front of him. If you don't want to fight, you don't have to. My only priority is to prevent Akatsuki from capturing you. You can lead whatever sort of life you like in Konoha under my protection. Soshiku grinned. And all I have to do is trust that you will honor your word and treat me like a human being instead of a weapon. A dozen bolts of lightning fell in a circle around Naruto and Yugito. The lightning did not come that close, but it still took every ounce of Naruto's nerve not to teleport away. I know just what sort of bastards Uchiha's are, I wouldn't trust you as far as I could throw you. You're wrong, Yugito shouted. Naruto is nothing like your Tsuchikage or even my Raikage. The Hokage is by far the most honorable man I have ever met. He truly cares about the people who follow him and does all he can to keep them safe. When he says you will be well treated, he means it. Sure, Soshiku mocked. He's a Kage who cares about his people instead of just seeing them as tools to be used. And I'm sure in Konoha the streets are paved with gold and the rivers flow with milk and honey. I don't believe you. You just want to use me as a weapon, and I'm sure the second I was in your village your mask would fall away. Everything I have said to you is the truth. Naruto spoke desperately. Akatsuki will never let you go. Let them come. Soshiku roared defiantly. I'll deal with them like I've dealt with the hunter nins. These ninja are more powerful than any you have ever faced. Naruto warned. I don't fear them and I don't fear you. Now I've heard your lies and I'm not buying any of them. Go away and have your friends leave me alone, or attack me and let's get on with it. Naruto stared at him. Is there anything I could say or do that could convince you? No, Soshiku said. The only way you'll get me to Konoha is in chains or in a box. He waited for them to charge at him. Naruto continued to stare at him for a while. I see. He turned around and began to slowly walk back down the hill. Let's go Yugito, we're done here. He shouted back over his shoulder. If you ever change your mind you will be welcomed in Konoha. Soshiku watched them go down the hill and quickly run off. He watched them go carefully, all the while keeping their two friends in mind. He waited for some sort of surprise, but it didn't come. He waited. After a time the four scents were completely gone. It seemed they had actually chosen not to attack him. He was very surprised, but glad. XXXXXXXXXX. As they tramped down the hill Yugito spoke just above a whisper. We're not actually leaving, are we? Yes we are. Naruto answered without missing a step. I'm sure we can take him. Yugito said. I am too. I can think of at least 6 ways we could capture him. Yugito stared at him confused. Then why are we going? Because if we did capture him we would be forced to lock him up to hold him safely. If we took him by force he would be too dangerous to ever let out. He looked over his shoulder at her. I will not attack a man and imprison him when he is not an enemy and just wants to be left in peace. If I did that I'd be no different than Akatsuki or the Tsuchikage. They continued walking down to the base of the hill. And when Akatsuki comes after him again? Yugito asked quietly. Well, hopefully he'll survive and reconsider my offer of help. What if he gets captured instead? Then he dies and Akatsuki moves a step close to their ultimate goal. Naruto answered. Please don't take this the wrong way. Yugito said respectfully. But I think you are making a mistake. He looked over at her again. I am going to tell you a quick story about a ninja named Uchiha Sasuke. He was Itachi's younger brother. I had known him since starting the academy. We never liked each other. Somehow over time, either for his own reasons or because of something Itachi did, Sasuke came to hate me so much he decided he had to kill me. But he had a problem. Even though he was an arrogant bastard he had enough sense of reality to at least realize that he had no chance of ever beating me. I had never lost a fight to him, and over the years the gap between us only widened. But he was absolutely determined not just to kill me, but to defeat me in battle. So what did he do? Yugito asked as they began to run back to where Kakashi and Kiba were waiting. He found a way to activate a much more powerful version of the Sharingan. He believed with this enhanced Sharingan he would finally be a match for me. The only problem was that the only way to activate it was to suffer the deep feelings of anguish of killing someone very close to you. What? Naruto nodded. The Uchihas had discovered this method of gaining greater power and it was one of their clan secrets. Sasuke was willing to do anything to defeat me, and so to gain the power he needed he took his girlfriend to a nice quiet spot, and snapped her neck. As we fought he told me it had been necessary in order for him to finally beat me. Naruto took a deep breath. I will never do the same. I will never start down that path where the ends justify the means, where committing evil deliberately is acceptable so long as it leads to a greater good. I'll fight my enemies to the extreme limit of my abilities, but I won't become like them. I understand, Yugito answered in a quiet and respectful voice. He truly is the most honorable of men. Once they reached Kakashi and Kiba, Naruto explained his decision. The two other ninjas disagreed with it but accepted it. Shortly afterwards they were back in Konoha. Chapter 86. There was a yellow flash and Naruto was back in his office. Shizune was still there and looked surprised. "You're back a lot sooner than I expected," Shizune said, pleased. "How did things go?" "Not well." Naruto sighed. He took out a scroll and tossed it onto the floor. Release. With a large puff of smoke, Kakashi, Kiba, and Yugito appeared. "So what happened to the other ninja?" Shizune asked. "Naruto decided to be all noble and let him go." Kiba growled. "Kiba," Kakashi spoke sharply. "It is not our place to question the commands of our Hokage. Not even after he made us waste all that time chasing that guy in the rain. It was all for noting. It was all just one huge waste of time." Kiba said angrily. He didn't like to fail. Naruto looked over at his old friend and teammate without any resentment. "It wasn't a waste, Kiba. Your mission wasn't to beat him or capture him, it was just to track him down so I could make him my offer. I'm marking this mission as successful and you and Neeson will both get mission checks." The news didn't seem to make Kiba any happier. "I don't get why you just let him go without a fight." "Because he wasn't my enemy," Naruto answered firmly. "He didn't want anything to do with me. In his own way he was an innocent bystander who just wanted to be left alone. I would have had to beat him unconscious and then held him in a cell for months or years. I am not going to take a man by force and imprison him when his only crime is that he is being targeted by my enemies. If I did, then I'd be better off wearing robes with red clouds on them rather than these." He was putting the Hokage robes back on. "What happens if Akatsuki get him?" Kiba demanded. "Then they win this particular fight and the war continues. I am not pretending that this makes things any easier for us. But if we really are fighting for something worthwhile, then we have to act with honor even when it's not convenient," Naruto said. Kakashi smiled beneath his mask and nodded. "Sensei would have said the same thing. Your father Naruto was a powerful ninja and fearsome warrior, but always a man of great honor and decency." "Well, I still say you're wrong," Kiba muttered. Naruto shook his head and let it go. "Say Kiba, do I smell like fox to you?" Kiba's look of surprise was answer enough. "What are you talking about?" "Soshiku, the ninja we dealt with, said I smelled a little of fox," Naruto explained. "Have I ever had a fox scent, Kiba? Even a small one?" But Kiba shook his head. "Naruto, if I had ever picked up an animal scent on you, I'd have said something. You've never had a fox scent. The reason Dog Boy here has never picked up a fox scent, Naruto, is because it's not a physical scent. The scent is connected to your chakra, not your body." Yugito spoke. "So you can smell fox on my chakra?" Naruto asked. She nodded. "Why didn't tell me?" She looked at him in surprise. "I thought you already knew, and I thought it would be rude to just bring up." Kiba looked at her. "Hey, the very first time we met you said I smelled like wet dog." Yugito shrugged. "Well, I respect Naruto." She gave him a catty grin. "Hey!" Kiba barked. Kakashi took hold of both shoulders and began directing Kiba towards the door. "Come on, we're home, let's get something to eat. I'll even pay." Kiba quieted down but at the door suddenly looked back at the Hokage. "Oh Naruto. I just remembered something really important I was wanting to ask you." "What?" Kiba had a huge smile on his face. "You're going to have an open bar at the wedding, right?" XXXXXXXXXXX. It was about an hour before dawn. As he so often did, Pain stood at the opening of the alcove and stared out at the village. It was raining, of course. Conan approached him quietly. "Do you want breakfast before we go?" He shook his head. "I am not hungry." She was at his side holding a pair of white chrysanthemums. She handed one over to him. "Ready." With a simple nod he leapt away and she followed him. XXXXXXXXXX. Through the darkness the two of them raced through and eventually out of the village. The handful of ninjas to spot them were wise enough to keep a safe distance from their god and his messenger angel. Traveling through the land he ruled, Pain thought of the improvements he had brought since destroying Hanzo and his ilk. He had opened 40 brand new orphanages and given them enough funding to actually feed, shelter, and educate the flood of war orphans that still existed. He had brought an end to the unending series of wars that had plagued Rain Country since Hanzo had come to power. He had taken all the refugees that had been driven off their lands by the constant sweep of war and put them back on their lands. He was especially proud of all the small farmers who had been restored to their ancestral farms and lands. Hanzo had allowed 20 lords to buy up all the lands that had been abandoned during the war. These 20 lords ran their properties as massive plantations where peasants were kept bound to the land with few rights in order to make them rich. Pain had viewed the 20 lords as among Hanzo's strongest supporters. He had killed them and their families and confiscated all they had. The plantations were broken up into small farms with the ownership being passed on to the peasants who actually worked the land. The vast wealth that had been confiscated helped fund the orphanages and hundreds of other construction projects aimed at helping the people. He had done much since seizing power to help his people. But he needed to do much more. XXXXXXXXXX. 16 years ago. It was raining, it was always raining. Yahiko was looking out at the rain. How he hated it. It rained almost every day for at least a few hours, and on many days the rain just never stopped. Right now the three of them were in an old abandoned hut near an old village that was abandoned. Most of the countryside was like that. The people who were still alive were going to the cities that seemed at least a little safer. Conan had talked about doing that too, but Yahiko was dead set against it. If they went to a city or to the ninja village there would be men who would try to use them, whether as workers or as soldiers. Yahiko wasn't about to let anyone control them. The food is ready, Conan called to him. Yahiko grunted and shut the hut's door. Over a small fire in the middle of the hut 2 rabbits were done cooking. He had hunted and killed the rabbits. Conan had scrounged a few herbs and taken care of the actual cooking. Nagato had gathered the firewood and made a few repairs to the leaky roof. Their teamwork had improved to the point that they were rarely hungry anymore. But there were still problems. Yahiko ate his food in fast bites without comment. He thought the rabbit was very good with all the flavoring Conan had used, but he didn't bother telling her so. He also didn't bother to slow down to try and savor his food. He wanted to get done as fast as he could so he could be ready for anything. Conan ate more slowly, enjoying the meal and the warmth of the fire. She made a few comments about the food hoping to start a conversation. Nagato ate slowly, eyes focused down on his meal. He seemed even more morose than usual. Conan finally gave up and the three of them ate in silence. That silence was broken with a few quiet words from Nagato. "I miss Jiraiya-sensei." His 2 friends looked at him. Conan with sympathy and Yahiko with open annoyance. "Forget about Jiraiya," Yahiko said brusquely. "He left 3 months ago, he's not a part of our lives anymore. He said we would meet again when we were adults." Nagato said quietly. "And you believed him?" Yahiko replied. "How many times did he leave us by ourselves so he could do research? When we all knew he was just going to get drunk and maybe try to bed down a pretty girl. He always told lies whenever the truth was unpleasant for him. He damn well knew we'd never see each other again. He just said that to make his goodbye easier. Well, I believe we'll see him again." Conan spoke up. "You're both idiots then," Yahiko said. "Don't you care about Jiraiya-sensei at all?" Nagato accused. "I will always respect him as my sensei and as a great ninja. I acknowledge that he did more for us than anyone else ever has. For that he will always have my gratitude. But that doesn't mean that he wasn't lying to us when he said we would meet again. Jiraiya is a part of the past now, we need to worry about the future." Nagato put his face down. "Well, I really miss him." His voice seemed to crack. Yahiko stiffened where he was sitting and sent the other boy a dangerous look. "Are you crying?" "No," the sad boy denied it, but his voice gave him away. Angrily Yahiko stood up and yanked Nagato to his feet. Facing each other, tears were running down Nagato's face. "You're crying again," Yahiko accused. "What sort of pathetic ninja are you? Ninjas don't cry." He began to shake the boy back and forth. Conan jumped up and grabbed Yahiko's left arm, trying to get him to let go. "Leave him alone. He's allowed to cry sometimes, I cry too." Yahiko let go but continued to glare at the weeping boy as Conan stepped between them. "I know you do, but at least you have the decency to do it. When you think you're alone or when you think we're asleep. But he cries all the time. Damn it, Nagato, you need to stop it. How are you going to survive in this world if you're always crying?" "But I can't help it," the boy wailed. "I feel so much pain all the time. I keep thinking about my family, about my home, about the people I've cared for like Jiraiya-sensei, and about the people I've had to kill for us to survive. I just can't bear it all. I don't want to hear about it anymore, Yahiko snapped. You're not the only one to lose his family and everyone he cared about. I happened to me too, and to Conan and to thousands of others. Your pain is nothing special. As for the people you've killed, you've had to. With your Rinnegan you're the strongest of us, you need to use it without falling apart every time. You need to be strong. But I'm not, the boy whispered. And I don't think I can be. I try, I do, but I don't have it in me to stop caring. Then how the hell are you going to survive this miserable world? Yahiko demanded. The world doesn't give a damn if you're hurting. The world is nothing but a savage jungle where the strong devour the weak. And if you're going to be weak all the time, you may as well lay down and die and save us all the trouble. There was a loud smack as Conan slapped him as hard as she could. Don't you dare say that. She screamed at him. We're all we have, we're a family and we need to take care of each other. You apologize for saying that. Conan was rarely angry, but when she was it was impressive. Frowning he looked at Nagato. I'm sorry, he said flatly. He turned and headed out the door. Conan decided to give him some time to cool off. In the meantime she turned to her other friend and embraced him, gently putting her head on his shoulder. It's all right Nagato, he didn't mean it. But they both knew that he did. Nagato rested his head and felt the comfort of her warmth. I'm sorry I'm so weak. He whispered. It's all right, she assured him. She did what she could to console him. XXXXXXXXXXX. The rain had stopped. It was night time and Yahiko was standing by a large tree. He didn't bother to turn around when he heard someone approach. You need to work on your stealth techniques Nagato. Yahiko said. He heard the footsteps come to a stop. I'm sorry, Nagato said. You're always sorry. Yahiko finally turned to look at the boy's broken face. But it never helps, does it? I'm sorry if you hate me. Yahiko took a very deep breath and walked over to his friend. I don't hate you, I just want you to be strong. I want you to survive and you won't unless you harden yourself. I can't, the boy said miserably. I've tried so many times, but it's just not in me to be hard. I don't think I was ever cut out to be a ninja. Maybe you weren't, Yahiko sounded weary. But that just proves that Kami has one hell of a sense of humor since she gave you such a powerful dujutsu. If I had the Rinnegan and your abilities, he just shook his head imagining it. What would you do? Nagato asked quietly. Yahiko actually smiled for once. I'd change Rain Country, hell I'd change the whole damn world. I'd put an end to all these stupid wars and all the stupid waste. Nagato looked at him seriously, and slowly nodded. Maybe you could. With your strength and my ability maybe you really could change the world and bring it peace. Nagato shook his head. I've reached my end, I can't keep traveling with the two of you anymore. I love you both and I love Jiraiya-sensei, but I can't bear it anymore. Yahiko frowned again. Don't talk stupid. You wouldn't last a week without us. Look, I really am sorry for what I said, I didn't mean it. Stay with us and I'll try to be a little nicer, I promise. And just for an instant a tiny smile appeared on Nagato's face. Thank you for that, it means a lot to me. Please tell Conan that I love her and if you do see Jiraiya-sensei one day please tell him too. Nagato put a single finger on Yahiko's forehead. Yahiko suddenly felt a blinding pain, it was as if 100 knives were all being jammed into his skull at once. He blacked out without a sound. XXXXXXXXXXX. It was raining. Yahiko woke up with a blinding headache. As he sat up in the grass he became aware that it was morning. He also became aware of the sound of Conan's screams. She was just screaming for all she was worth, she wasn't saying anything, just simply howling. Despite his head he scrambled up to his feet and got out a kunai, his eyes were hurting along with his head. He stumbled over to her. Conan, what's wrong? She stared into his eyes and stopped yelling, she looked confused and stunned. She didn't seem able to talk. So instead she just lifted an arm and pointed to a spot behind him. He turned around to see what she was pointing at. There from the lowest branch of a large tree Nagato swung peacefully back and forth at the end of a rope. XXXXXXXXXXX. It was not raining. Pain and Conan stood before a marble monument. It was a strange monument. It was in the middle of nowhere, near the ruins of an old village that had been abandoned years ago. Almost no one knew of the monument's existence. Those who did know of it did not understand what it was meant to represent, though mostly they assumed it was to honor the innocents who had died in the many wars. The monument was made of pristine white marble and had many warding jutsus placed on it. It was a simple column 10 feet high, on top of which a life-size statue of a young boy weeping. Only 3 words had been carved into the marble and these were near the base of the column. Nagato, forgive me. Only 2 people understood what those words meant. XXXXXXXXXXX. They both placed down a flower and stood there in respectful silence. Conan looked over to him, he was weeping openly. This was the only time he would ever permit himself to cry. Each year on the anniversary of Nagato's death they had come here to lay a flower at his grave. The monument had been the very first thing Pain had ordered to be built. As they stood there and remembered him, it slowly began to rain. Chapter 87. Do I really need to go over budget reports? Naruto whined. Couldn't one of my clones be doing this instead? His chief advisor rolled his eyes. Don't be so troublesome, if I have to do it then so do you. The other person in his office gave him a stern look. Naruto, you said that if it was anything that required serious thought and consideration you would do it yourself and not use a clone. Shizune reminded him. But they're budget reports. Shouldn't an accountant be looking at these instead of the Hokage? Naruto pleaded. He had started looking into a really great jutsu and wanted to get back to it. The village accountants are the ones who put the monthly reports together. Shikamaru confirmed. But you still need to be familiar with them to make decisions on where to make any necessary cuts or invest any surpluses. Naruto suddenly smiled. You know Shikamaru is chief advisor. Shikamaru gave him a flat look. I'm not doing this by myself, Naruto, so stop trying to get out of it. As Naruto stared down at all the numbers in front of him there was a knock on the door. One of his many secretaries stuck her head in. I beg pardon Hokage-sama, but Mamashi Haku and Uchiha Gabella are here requesting to talk to you. Well, send them right in, he said eagerly. The two entered hand in hand. Their recent engagement was a well-known fact throughout Konoha. The fact that Gabella, much like Hinata, had since moved into the Namikaze mansion was a closely guarded secret. Naruto stood up from behind his desk to greet them. Hey you two, what are you wanting to talk to me about? He grinned. Something you couldn't ask over breakfast. Haku and Gabella glanced at each other. Actually Naruto, could we talk in private? Well, that sounds kind of serious. He politely asked if Shikamaru and Shizune would mind giving them a few minutes. Once it was the 3 of them, Naruto sat back down and waved the 2 of them to be seated as well. So what's so important you didn't want Shikamaru or Shizune to hear? The young couple looked at each other again. Well, to begin with, I would like to formally request to establish a clan here in Konoha, the Mamashi clan. Naruto had a huge smile. Done, I've actually been waiting for this. He pulled a sheet out of a desk drawer. He signed and stamped the paper. By order of the Hokage, I recognize you, Mamashi Haku, as the founder and head of the Mamashi clan. You shall be given lands, those lands to belong to your clan for so long as you faithfully serve the village of Konohagakure and its Hokage. You will be granted the same rights and privileges of any other recognized clan, including a hereditary seat on the council. He handed over the official order. Congratulations. Thank you Hokage-sama, and thank you for everything you have done for me, you and Kushina-sama. It has always been my pleasure, Haku. I like to think that you and I are proof that enemies can become friends. Where will the lands be? Gabella asked. Well, if you don't object, I was thinking of turning training ground 16 over to you. That's also where the lands for the Uzumaki estates will be. So you would become neighbors to Uzumaki and only be a couple miles from Namikaze and Hyuga. Haku smiled. I would like that very much. Now you will have to pay for the construction of your mansion or home on your own. Naruto pointed out. I know my mom would be happy to help with that. But Haku shook his head. The Namikaze clan had already been more than generous to me, I could not take your money. Especially not for something that is sure to be hugely expensive. My uncle Shinzo doesn't have a problem with it. But he is a blood relative whereas I am only a friend. Haku said. You're a lot more than, just, a friend to me and my mom. Haku nodded respectfully. Thank you for that, but I still do not want any money from you. Gabella sighed. I would have liked to have helped but I don't seem to be very popular with my clan right now. Oh, Naruto quirked an eyebrow. She slowly nodded. My father and the clan elders were all for me marrying Haku, so long as he became an Uchiha. When I told them I was going to marry him and join his clan, they became rather cold. They asked her to leave the Uchiha compound. Haku sounded a bit angry. They have not gone so far as to actually disown her, but she is no longer welcome. It's not the entire clan, Gabella was quick to point out. Most of my clansmen are happy for me. It's only the leadership of the clan that is unhappy. Which includes your father. Naruto said flatly. She could only nod. I had hoped the clan might be willing to give Haku a loan, but well, that's not going to happen. And suddenly Naruto had a marvelous idea and began to chuckle. You know Gabella, I agree with you, the Uchiha clan should help. He reached into another drawer. He held out a check. Here, this is for you. Think of it as one hell of a wedding gift. I have already said that I will not take your money. Haku said. Oh, but it's not my money, not really. It's not from my clan or from the village, it's from the Uchiha clan. What? Gabella snatched the check out of the Hokage's hand and looked it over. This bears my father's signature and it's for 10 million ryu. How on earth did you get this? It's the payment of the bounties that were put on Itachi. Naruto stated. But you earned that money by killing him. Haku stated. I still can't accept it. Gabella looked over to him. Haku honey, we're taking the money. He looked at her in surprise. But, no buts, she said firmly. This new clan will have your name, but I am just as much a founder of it as you are. Our children and their descendants will have the Sharingan as well as your bloodline. Since I am helping found a brand new clan, it is only right that my original clan help a bit. With that she folded up the check and made it disappear. Naruto had an amused look. Gabella, you do know that Haku qualifies under the law of clan restoration and can have up to 3. Seeing her glare, Naruto came to an abrupt halt. I know all about that law. Gabella replied coolly. Haku and I have discussed it. He won't be having any other wives, right honey? Haku nodded. Yes, dear. Gabella looked back to Naruto and her look softened a bit. Speaking of the clan restoration law, don't you qualify under it? As a matter of fact, I do. Does that mean you plan on marrying again after next week? Naruto shook his head. No, I love Hinata with my entire heart. There could never be anyone else for me. Haku smiled and looked over at Gabella. I know how you feel. XXXXXXXXXXX. The evening of July 1st. Kushina was sitting down in a chair when Alyssa came bounding inside. She hurried over to her mother and sat down in her lap. Kushina laughed and gave her young daughter a hug and kiss on the cheek. Are you all done with practice today? Kushina asked. Yes, cousin, uncle and grand-uncle let me stop early today. They usually make me work until I am exhausted. Well dear, they're just trying to get you ready for the academy. Uzumaki training methods are very hard but very effective. Is this how you and Nisan became ninja? That's right. Alyssa smiled. Then I will keep working hard so I can be a great ninja too. Kushina laughed and gave her another small kiss. Are you ready for the wedding tomorrow? You know you have the most important job. Really? Alyssa said excitedly. Kushina nodded and gave her a serious look while trying not to giggle. Oh absolutely dear, without you Naruto and Hinata won't be able to get married. She immediately jumped off her mother's lap. I better go practice then. XXXXXXXXXXX. Kiba turned to his friend. You completely suck, you know that right? Kakashi sighed. Kiba, this is supposed to be a happy occasion. Shikamaru meanwhile was hardly upset by Kiba's opinion. What makes you say that? You call this a bachelor party? He waved his arms about at the table where all of Naruto's male friends had gathered. They were in a bar enjoying a few drinks and sharing stories about their friend. Naruto isn't even here, and why are there no strippers? Kiba demanded to know. Yash, I think this is a fine party. Lee spoke up. You would, Kiba muttered. Shikamaru sighed. You are really being troublesome. Naruto specifically told me he didn't want a bachelor party, so I thought we could just have a few drinks in his honor instead. But it's a sacred male tradition. Kiba complained. Shikamaru shrugged. He promised Hinata he wouldn't have one, and Tamari told me that if I threw one she would beat me with her fan. Kiba looked at him with open contempt. Shika, you are completely and totally whipped. Kiba began to chug his beer. Shikamaru shrugged. Maybe, but at least I'll be having sex tonight. Kiba immediately started choking on his beer to everyone else's amusement. XXXXXXXXXXX. As Kiba was staggering home with Akamaru patiently at his side, Kiba didn't want to drink and ride. He ran into Jiraiya, and the two gorgeous women who were with him. He had a blonde with a tank top and a mini skirt that could have belonged to Anko. He also had a woman with raven hair in a low-cut black evening gown that was split down the side to reveal a whole lot of leg. Both women were well endowed and looked to be in their 20s. The old lecher had an arm wrapped around each and they were headed down the street towards one of his houses. "So you ladies ready for a trip to a hot tub?" Jiraiya asked with a perverted giggle. Both women laughed and nodded. "How do you do that?" Kiba shouted. "Huh." Jiraiya looked up and spotted Kiba and his huge dog. "Were you talking to me, kid?" Kiba drunkenly nodded. "How does an old guy like you get such hot women?" Jiraiya looked offended. "Don't you know who I am, kid? I am the legendary Jiraiya. The great toad sage, victor of 100 battles, member of the legendary 3, student of the great Sarutobi, and sensei to not one but 2 Hokages. For me women fall like cherry blossoms in a windstorm," he declared proudly. The blonde girl giggled. "He took us shopping and got us a lot of really nice things." Suddenly deflated he got the two women moving again leaving Kiba and Akamaru on their own once more. Kiba looked over to his faithful companion. "Man, I hate being a virgin." His dog nodded and whimpered agreement. XXXXXXXXXXX. July 2nd was an absolutely beautiful day. Hinata left immediately after breakfast to go to the Hyuga mansion where she would prepare. The Namikaze mansion meanwhile was the site of barely controlled chaos as the entire household prepared for the wedding. A perimeter of Anbu had already been set up to watch out for any possible trouble. 100 caterers had arrived and were busy setting up the temporary seats and other structures. The reception would be held outside along with the wedding. Tables were being set up and the meals prepared. Cases of beer and hundreds of bottles of sake and other liquors were assembled and then surrounded by 4 long tables forming a square. They knew what an open bar meant and expected to be under siege the entire time. Inside men and women dressed up in their very best and quickly rehearsed their parts. All the members of both the Namikaze and Uzumaki clans were part of the wedding party. Kushina was especially busy as she ran about making sure everything was absolutely perfect for her son's wedding day. The wedding was rather unique in the fact that it had been both meticulously planned and thrown together. For over 2.5 years she and Hinata had been planning this day until every last detail had been decided and worked out. Then of course the accident had forced them to change the dates. Kushina had suddenly found herself rushing about like a mad woman trying to secure the services of all the people necessary. Not surprisingly the caterers, the band, and the priest had made prior commitments to a pair of other weddings. Though she didn't like to resort to it, she was not above using bribery when it meant giving her son and her future daughter the perfect wedding. It had not been easy. She'd been required to buy one of the couples a new house, spent a couple 100,000 ryu on top of that, and even arranged for the Hokage to do a few favors for the families involved. But in the end she had convinced the other parties to change the dates of their weddings and so free up July 2nd. Of course as busy as she was it had been impossible to check on everything. Running through the halls of her home she came to a sudden and abrupt halt. "Anko, what the hell are you wearing?" Kushina demanded. Anko sent her an annoyed look. "What? This is what I always wear." She had on her usual tan trench coat, mini skirt, and fishnet. "Why aren't you in your kimono?" Anko grinned. "You're kidding, right? I didn't wear one to my own wedding. What makes you think I was going to wear one here?" Her grin disappeared as she felt a sudden flood of killer intent coming from the groom's mother. "Anko," Kushina ground out, feeling her blood pressure rising and her temper shortening. "Whether you like it or not, as my brother's wife you are automatically part of the wedding party. You are not going out dressed like that." Anko took out a kunai and began to casually twirl it around her finger. "Yes I am," Anko replied defiantly. "No you are not." Kushina's killer intent jumped up a couple notches. Drawn by the familiar feel of his little sister's killer intent, Shinzo entered the hall. "Is there a problem, Kuki?" Kushina sent her brother a glare. "Did you know your wife here plans to attend the wedding dressed like that?" He smiled and turned to Anko. "Honey, I know we talked about this. You already agreed to dress up for the wedding." Anko began to pout. But Shinzo took his wife into his arms and kissed her. "Please Anko, just to make me happy." Anko grinned and nodded. "Fine, but you owe me one and I'll be collecting payment tonight." Kushina received an annoyed look as Anko headed to her room, hopefully to change. Kushina looked at her brother. Why are you still married to that woman? Shinzo tried to look innocent. Well, she does thing with her tongue. Kushina slapped her hands over her ears and ran away. XXXXXXXXXXX. Yugito stood in front of a full-size mirror. She was wearing a kimono that Kushina had thoughtfully had custom made for her. It was gold-colored, the image of a gray cat playing with a ball of yarn across the front. She really liked it. She felt very strange wearing it though, she had never worn a kimono before. She could not remember the last time she had gone out in public in anything but ninja clothing. Looking at herself, she had a sudden fantasy of Naruto seeing her in it and suddenly feeling the irresistible urge to start kissing her. She saw herself blushing in the mirror. In the back of her mind she heard a childish voice begin singing. Yugito and Naruto sitting in a tree, kissing. Quiet Nibby. XXXXXXXXXX. As noon approached, the guests began to arrive and take their seats. Many of them were friends and members of the Hyuga clan. But as the Hokage was getting married, there was no way to avoid also inviting all the clan heads and important officials. It made for an interesting mix. Neji and Tenten arrived together and sat down on the bride's side. Haku and Gabella were already there, of course. Their teammate Tayuya arrived, muttering to herself that she was only there for the open bar. Danzo came and was seated up near the front. Uchiha Ryuki arrived soon after. He made a point to say a quick hello to his daughter and her fiancé before being seated. He was careful not to look to where Danzo was. Lee arrived there on his own. The best man came with a beautiful but troublesome blonde. Ino and Choji came together. She sent a frosty glance towards Tamari but otherwise was in a fine mood. More people arrived alone and in groups until the seats were all filled. XXXXXXXXXXX. Naruto was in the traditional black Montsuki kimono and pacing back and forth. His mother entered his room and saw him. It's time, Naruto-kun. Kushina told her son. Here, let me look at you. You look so handsome. He nodded nervously. Thanks, Mom. She placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. You don't need to be so nervous, my son. She smiled happily. I know that, Mom, but I sort of can't help it. Even though she was happy, Kushina had to fight the urge to burst into tears. My baby is getting married. Mom, I'm not a baby. He replied. He paused and looked at his mother and then embraced. Mom, thank you so much. For what, dear? For everything, Mom, for taking care of me, for training me, for teaching me right from wrong, but most of all just for loving me. All that I am is because of you and your love. Ah, my son, she let out a small sob. A mother's love should be the one thing in this world that every single person should know. You don't ever need to thank me for that, Naruto-kun. From the very first time I held you in my arms, I loved you, and just having you in my life has been the greatest joy I have ever known. She quickly dabbed her eyes and smiled at him. Now come on, before your silly mother makes you late for your own wedding. XXXXXXXXXXX. It was exactly noon. The band began to play the march. A temporary arch had been put up in the rose garden with a long red carpet leading to it. The chairs had been set up on either side. As the music began, Hyuga Hiyashi led his eldest daughter down the aisle at a stately pace. At the other end of the carpet, Naruto was standing flanked by Shikamaru and his mother. Little Alyssa was standing close by in a pink kimono holding up a silk pillow with 2 rings. Hiyashi and Hinata moved slowly towards them. Hinata's left hand was held out in front of her and was in her father's right. In her other hand, Hinata held a bouquet of red roses. Hinata was in a silk shiro maku of purest white. As she came down the aisle, Ino was holding the edge of the wedding kimono to prevent it from dragging along the ground. Hinata's face was done in white and her dark hair had been put up. Her makeup only made her beautiful eyes stand out even more. As Naruto watched her, he thought she looked like an angel who had come to earth. He honestly wondered what he had ever done in his life to have earned the love of such an amazing woman. XXXXXXXXXXX. As she walked down the aisle, all she could see was him, so handsome, so kind, and so loving. He was smiling at her and looking at her with eyes filled with devotion. She had always loved him. She could not remember a time in her life when she had not. To her he was her heart and always would be. She would never love anyone else but him. And as she moved closer to him, she honestly wondered what she had ever done in her life to have earned the love of such an amazing man. XXXXXXXXXX. When they had at least reached the end of the aisle, Hiyashi ceremoniously took his daughter's hand and placed it into Naruto's. Together the couple turned to face the priest standing before them in his white blouse and billowing red pants. Smiling, the priest took out a small cup and carefully filled it with ceremonial sake. Share in this drink as the two of you will share in all of life's joys and hardships. The priest intoned. He handed the cup to Naruto, who took a small sip. He then passed it to Hinata, who also sipped from it. Have you come here to devote yourselves to one another of your own free will? The priest questioned. Yes, Naruto answered solemnly. Hi, Hinata said. The priest looked out sternly upon the assembled guests. Can any here give just cause why these two should not be joined in sacred marriage? If anyone had dared to say a word at that point, Kushina likely would have killed them on the spot. Satisfied, the priest returned his attention to the two of them. Do you understand that the vows you make this day are spoken before Kami and before all those who have come here to bear witness? Yes, Naruto said. Yes, Hinata said. Then speak the vows, and speak only the truth. Smiling down at Alyssa, Naruto took the smaller of the two gold rings. He then carefully slid it onto Hinata's left hand as he spoke. My wife, in sickness and in health I promise that I will love you, respect you, console you, be faithful to you, and protect you. From this day on until the day of my death, this do I swear. With her hands trembling slightly, Hinata took the other wedding band and placed it on Naruto's left hand. My husband, in sickness and in health I promise that I will love you, respect you, console you, be faithful to you, and protect you. From this day on until the day of my death, this do I swear. The priest held his hand up. May Kami grant you the blessings of health, happiness, and children. May your union be long and lasting. I declare that you are now husband and wife. He smiled and nodded to Naruto. You may kiss your bride. Naruto was only too happy to do so. May I present to you, the priest called out. Namikaze Naruto and his bride, Namikaze Hinata. As the people began to applaud and cheer, the young couple broke their kiss and looked into each other's eyes. I love you, Naruto whispered to her. And I love you, Hinata answered. They kissed once more as all around them people celebrated. Chapter 88. Given her normal concerns for security, Mizuki Kushina had decided that the mansion would be off limits to all those who did not already live there. Instead, the reception would be held outside. Many round tables were set up with 8 places each. The food was the gourmet and the best that could be provided. A small stand had been set up where the band would play and area was cleared for dancing. After nightfall, a fireworks display would be put on for the entire village to enjoy. And of course, there was an open bar serving an endless stream of beer and sake. One thing that could never be said was that Kushina worried about cost when it came to her son. Immediately upon the ceremony being completed, the bar was opened. A couple people managed to get there with an indecent amount of speed. Sake, Kiba and Jiraiya both yelled at the same time. Jiraiya looked over at the young ninja. Hey kid, I remember you from last night. Kiba snorted. Yeah, I remember you too, Jiraiya-sama. Pretty sad, an old guy like you having to bribe women to be with him. Jiraiya smiled as he collected his bottle of sake and began to wander off to talk to some of the beauties who were here. Weddings were among the best places to get lucky. Maybe, but still not as sad as a young guy complaining to his dog that he's a virgin. Kiba began to choke as he couldn't come up with anything to say. Virgin, huh? A feminine voice spoke from behind. He turned around. There was Tayuya standing there in a cream-colored kimono grinning at him. Oh Kami, just take me now. Kiba muttered as he picked up his bottle of sake and downed about half of it in a swig. It was high quality and strong, he could feel it burn on the way down. Tayuya looked at the bartender. Sake, and don't bother with the cup. She then looked back over to Kiba. So you're a fucking virgin, huh? Kiba growled a bit. No, I'm not. She brought the little ceramic bottle to her lips and tossed most of it back in one shot. No, huh? Then name one girl you've been with. Kiba blushed a bit. He put the empty bottle down and ordered another one. He was already feeling just a little warm. I'm just waiting for the right girl. He dropped his eyes to the bar. Tayuya finished the sake and ordered a second one herself. Well, maybe you'll luck out and find someone drunk enough that she doesn't mind that wet dog smell. Bite me. He muttered and started on bottle number 2. XXXXXXXXXXX. A large table had been set aside for wedding gifts, and it was loaded down with all sorts of goodies ranging from fine china to simple wads of cash. A few people however insisted on giving their gifts directly to the happy couple. XXXXXXXXXXX. Inuzuka Sume, Kiba's mother and head of the clan, handed them a small box with a pink bow and air holes. Congratulations and best wishes for many, many pups. Here, you might want to open this now rather than later. Hinata took the box and opened it. A little gray puppy with large brown eyes looked up at her. Oh, how adorable. Hinata squealed. Naruto smiled. Arigato Sume, I know how rare it is for your clan to part with any of the dogs from your kennel. It was true, the Inuzuka clan bred the finest dogs on the continent. There was a huge demand for them, but the clan never sold any of them, and only rarely offered them as gifts. Sume barked and laughed and gave him a rough bow. It is my pleasure. Not only are you the Hokage but my son's friend and teammate. Oh, what a cute puppy. Alyssa came over on the run. Can I hold him? Smiling, Hinata carefully handed the dog over to her. Of course. Alyssa held the tiny puppy up close to her face. He licked her nose and the little girl laughed in delight. Oh, I love him. Naruto gave his new wife a questioning look. Hinata smiled and nodded. Alyssa-chan, Naruto asked. Would you like to be the one to take care of him? Really? Alyssa asked excitedly. Naruto nodded and gave her a serious look. I'm sure mom would be fine with it, but it's a serious responsibility. He will depend on you and you must take good care of him. I will, I promise. Alyssa laughed and hugged her new pet to her. Oh, what's his name? Sume smiled at the little girl. He is called Chikai. Naruto smiled. He is called Little. Does that mean we will have to change his name if he gets as big as Akamaru? Alyssa looked extremely happy. Hello Chikai, my name is Alyssa and I promise to take care of you from now on. The puppy yipped and wagged his little tail in apparent agreement. XXXXXXXXXXX. Here you are, I hope you'll put it to good use. Kakashi smiled as he handed them a large orange book. Naruto accepted it with an amused look while Hinata was frowning. Well, thanks Nissan, nothing says, good luck with your marriage, quite like porn. It's adult literature, Kakashi grinned. It's the hardcover collection of the Ika Ika series volumes 1 through 10. Hinata managed a slight smile. Thank you Kakashi-sensei, I promise we will find a use for it. I am sure we can put it to good use in the fireplace. XXXXXXXXXXX. Congratulations on your wedding, Tamari said happily. She handed Hinata a small velvet case about a foot long and a few inches wide. It's a ceremonial fan. Hinata opened the case and took it out. It's exquisite. Thank you Tamari-chan, I love it. Meanwhile Shikamaru presented his gift to Naruto. It was a small book with a plain brown cover. Naruto read the cover. How to deal with your wife's mood swings. Naruto just looked at Shikamaru. Trust me, you'll need that before long. Shikamaru said simply. XXXXXXXXXXX. A tipsy Jiraiya handed him a large orange book. Here you go kid. Be sure to use it. Jiraiya began giggling as he headed back to the bar. Naruto turned to his wife and held up the large orange-covered tome. Look honey, book ends. Hinata shook her head and took the book from him. Look Naruto-kun, kindling. XXXXXXXXXXX. The meal was soon being served. The wedding party was seated at two large tables that were located right next to each other. It was a fine meal and the adults were drinking ceremonial sake while the children had tea. Hinata had taken a tiny sip of sake for the ceremony but was now drinking tea, as were Masaki and Aoi, Shinzo's very pregnant wives. Kushina was extremely surprised to see Anko also drinking tea. As well. Anko, I'm surprised that you're not having any sake. Kushina commented. I would normally expect you to have had at least a couple bottles by now. She was seated to Shinzo's right like always. His other two wives were seated to his left. Anko gave her husband a quick glance and he gave her just the slightest of nods. Anko smiled over in Kushina's direction. I've decided to give up drinking alcohol for a while. Kushina quirked an eyebrow. Restraint was not something she'd come to expect from Anko. Well, I think that's a fine decision. How long is a while? Anko had a huge grin. Oh, about 8.5 months. Everyone at the table stopped what they were doing and stared at her. Masaki and Aoi looked not only shocked but very unhappy as well. Kushina for her part was just staring in total disbelief. Are you pregnant? Enko laughed and gave her husband a kiss. Yeah, he knocked me up good. Kushina turned her glare on her brother. What the hell were you thinking? Shinzo gave his sister an innocent look. What? I thought my job was to have children, and she is my wife. Kushina quickly downed the cup in front of her and then poured herself another one. I think I'm going to need a lot more sake. XXXXXXXXXX. Following the meal, the band began playing and people began to dance. Naruto and Hinata had the first dance, of course, but soon others had joined them. XXXXXXXXXXX. So do you think our wedding will be like this? Haku asked as he held his dear one close. Gabella smiled and put her head on his shoulder as they slow danced. I doubt it will be quite this grand, but I know it will be wonderful. I want to give you the wedding you want. Haku spoke seriously. I want you to be happy. I will be Haku, just as long as you're the one I marry. XXXXXXXXXXX. Tayuya had sucked down 10 or 11 little bottles of sake, she had lost count. As she was leaning against the bar and feeling no pain. From where she was, she had a nice clear view of the dance floor. There were her teammates dancing close to each other. The happy fucking couple. I guess the stupid bitch was smart enough not to let him go. With her alcohol-soaked mind, she thought how unfair it was that some girls got everything. Some girls really did get it all. They were born rich, beautiful, and with a powerful bloodline. And as if all that weren't enough, they also seemed to get the best guys. Fucking princess, she muttered drunkenly. What? Kiba asked blankly. He'd stayed nearby drinking with her. You say something. Dance with me. She staggered a couple steps away from the bar. What? Kiba asked dumbly. She reached back and grabbed him around the collar, yanking him forward. I said come dance with me, you stupid fuck. XXXXXXXXXX. She got him out to the dance floor. She then leaned into him and they began to lurch about, not really in time to the music. Kiba was happy to get his arms around her and feel her close. He liked the smell of her, the look of her, and the feel of her. He let his hands slide down from her back to a spot a bit lower. He was already more than a little warm from all the booze, but now he was feeling much hotter. You're really beautiful, he said simply. She looked up into his blank gaze and laughed. You're fucking drunk. So are you, he answered. And you're still really, really beautiful. She looked at his face. He was way too drunk to hide anything. She could see that he wanted her and wanted her badly. The fact he was grabbing her ass was also a sign of that. Normally she would shut him down, and possibly hurt him. But at the moment she wanted to be wanted. She slid her hands into his shirt and let her fingers slowly dance across his chest. She could see him shake a bit at the feel of her touch. She put her face next to his and her lips by his ear. Kiba, wanna know a secret? She whispered teasingly. What? He grunted. She whispered slowly and thickly. I used to care about this boy named Sakin. I wanted to make him happy and he would ask me to do all these nasty little things to him. I would make him very happy. She laughed and she could feel him shiver again. XXXXXXXXXX. Yugito stood near the dance floor watching the couples dance. She had received a few requests for a dance but had turned them down. The truth was, being a guest at a wedding was not a situation she was used to. She wasn't completely comfortable in social situations like this, but it felt kind of nice. Out on the dance floor, Naruto was having a dance with his mother while Hinata danced with her father. She admired the ease with which he moved on the dance floor. She had him practice the sword just about every morning and could see those moves transferred to the dance floor. She couldn't help but wonder what it would feel like to dance with him, even just once. But as much of a stranger as she was to social customs, she still knew better than to go up to the groom and ask for a dance. Except for this one short interlude, all his dances were reserved for his wife. She wasn't jealous, she actually liked Hinata a great deal. It was obvious just how deeply the two of them loved each other. Hinata made him very happy and she would never do anything to interfere with that. She knew she could never act on these feelings inside of her. But she was glad for the feelings, and for the foolish little dreams they inspired. XXXXXXXXXX. The dancing continued into the late evening. Most of the guests remained to enjoy the food, drink, and music. Before too long, the happy couple excused themselves and took refuge inside their home. XXXXXXXXXX. Inside their room, Hinata's wedding kimono had been carefully put away. She had washed away the makeup and let her hair down. As she stepped into her husband's embrace, she had on nothing but a simple undershirt. "This has been the happiest day of my life." She sounded absolutely content. Naruto chuckled as he gave her a kiss. "Does that mean it is all downhill from here?" She giggled. "Of course not, silly. From now on we get to live our lives together as a family. It's what I've always dreamed of, Naruto-kun, and there's nothing I want more." He nodded, but looked just a bit sad. "I'm sorry we can't have a honeymoon." "Oh, I understand. You're the Hokage after all. But as long as we're both in the village I'll get to see you, and that's enough for me." Outside they could hear and see the fireworks beginning. Naruto had a reminiscent grin. "You know, Sarutobi told me once that a Hokage's life should be like a fireworks display, a slow and majestic rise until reaching a peak and then a magnificent and glorious sight, before fading away." Something about his words gave Hinata just a tiny feeling of dread. She looked at her husband and squeezed him tight. "You have only just begun your ascent, Naruto-kun." Nodding, he leaned down and kissed his wife passionately, as outside the fireworks blossomed and disappeared. XXXXXXXXXX. The next morning, she woke up with a splitting headache and a parched throat. She was just sitting up when she noticed a warm body lying next to her. She opened her bloodshot eyes and saw Kiba lying in her bed. He was asleep, but there was a grin on his face. It took her another moment to realize that they were both completely naked. She groaned and shut her eyes. "Oh fuck me." Chapter 89. The next 2 months lacked any great crises or desperate missions. Following their wedding, Hinata was assigned full-time to the hospital where she would work at least until after her pregnancy was complete. Naruto was also staying put in the village as no missions requiring the Hiraishin came up. So he concentrated on his duties as Hokage and on developing 2 new jutsus. He was disappointed at the lack of fresh intelligence concerning Akatsuki. Jiraiya sent him reports that were lacking anything substantial. There were vague rumors, but nothing really concrete. Jiraiya had suggested scouting aim. Naruto in turn suggested turning the bathhouses into grocery stores. This was not to suggest that nothing of importance happened. At the beginning of August, within 10 days of each other, Misaki and then Aoi each gave birth to a healthy son. Shinzo decided to let each wife choose the name of the child. XXXXXXXXXXX. Keisha, Misaki said happily. "His name is Keisha." The 3 of them were alone in her hospital room and Misaki was enjoying this rare monopoly on her husband's attention. Shinzo looked at his newborn son. The little guy was sleeping peacefully in his arms. It was amazing and humbling to him to have a son. During his long years in the granite quarry he had given up all hope on ever becoming a father. Now he was holding his little boy. Kuki had told him what it had felt like the first time she'd held Naruto. Now he understood, he loved his son completely and with his whole heart. But he could already see that there would be complications. "Are you sure you want to name him that?" Shinzo smiled and spoke with a light-hearted tone. "I'm not sure that's the best name. It has many different meanings, a lot of them not so good. It can mean despise, or ignore, or neglect." Misaki frowned. "Are you the sort of man who would treat his son in such a manner?" "Never. I will love and take care of all of my children." "I see." Misaki couldn't keep the bitterness out of her voice. "I suppose you only despise, ignore, and neglect your wives then?" Shinzo looked at her in honest surprise. "What are you talking about? I have always treated you and Aoi well, haven't I? You were never cruel and always polite. I admit that. But then again you were just as polite to the servants. If a stranger saw us together he might think me your servant, but never your wife." Shinzo frowned. "You can't complain about that now. I have never lied to you about what I wanted or expected. I never told you that I loved you, only that I would take care of you." "I know that," she said bitterly. "But I still thought you might share my bed on occasion." She looked at him pleadingly. "Am I so ugly to you that you find just sleeping with me repulsive?" "No. It's nothing like that. You're a beautiful woman, and I am fond of you." "Fond of me?" she repeated dully. "Yes, that's fair. You are fond of me as you might be fond of an old pair of slippers." As he gently rocked the baby back and forth in his arms he spoke in a calm but serious voice. "You were not tricked into this, Misaki. The prenuptial agreement, the discussions with your parents and with the Hokage, you knew from the start what this was. You were not some helpless child being forced into an arranged marriage. I wanted children and you wanted a husband and the security of being part of a clan. That was the bargain we made and I cannot see how you can condemn me when I have lived up to my part of it. Misaki paused a moment but then asked with a quiet voice. Why do you love her so much? There was pain and hurt in her voice, and more than a little jealousy too. They both knew which her she meant. Honestly, I don't really know, I just do. She looked at him and slowly nodded. I can understand that. I know what it's like to fall in love with someone without planning to. Her meaning was plain. Shinzo looked at her and simply didn't know how to answer. She was a good woman, and he really did like her, but he didn't feel anything more than that. Perhaps his son was able to sense his father's distress as he picked that moment to begin crying. Misaki held out her arms. Here, give him to me. Shinzo handed the boy over to his mother who gently held him close as she sang him a lullaby. Soon their baby was fast asleep again. Shinzo stood there and smiled at the sight of his son peacefully asleep in his mother's arms. You're going to be a wonderful mother. She smiled weakly and nodded. Thank you, I am glad you think me good for something at least. Misaki, you're right that, Keisha, has more than one meaning. For instance it can also mean, heir, or, successor. Shinzo began to look extremely uncomfortable. He was born less than 2 hours ago. You don't honestly expect me to name him my heir, do you? She frowned. Of course I do, he is your firstborn son. By all tradition he should be clan heir. But Shinzo shook his head. That may be the tradition in Konoha but not in Whirlpool. My husband, the Hitai Iteu wear bears the leaf symbol and you are in Konoha. When Tsunade granted me the right to re-establish my clan she promised me that I could keep all the Uzumaki clan traditions. There are a great many of them. One being that the Uzumaki do not name heirs until they are old enough to be ninja. Naruto was always clan heir. Kushina did not wait until he graduated the academy. Shinzo shook his head. My sister was acting as head of the Namikaze clan, and besides Naruto was her only child. Designating him clan heir was a matter of course. I on the other hand am going to have to make an actual choice. I won't do that until my children have become ninja and I know which of them I want to lead. She looked away from him feeling bitterly disappointed. You just want an excuse to make her child your heir. No, he said flatly. I want whichever of my children is best suited to lead the clan. And I won't know that for many years yet. He sighed. Is there any chance you would reconsider his name? She shook her head. You told me I could choose his name. His name is Keisha. Or do you plan on going back on your word? But he simply shook his head feeling defeated. I never go back on my word, for that is my ninja way. XXXXXXXXXX. The first-year students were all gathered at the academy yard. They were sitting on fold-out chairs next to the family members who had brought them. This was a welcoming ceremony. Tomorrow would be their first day at the academy. There was an eager buzz as children and adults talked to each other. One girl with light blue hair looked over to one light brown. Fumi, the blue-haired girl called out. The girl looked over at her. What is it, Miko? Have you heard? The Hokage's little sister is supposed to be coming here today. Fumi rolled her eyes. I bet it's just a story. I mean no way would the Hokage's sister be coming here. I bet she has all sorts of special trainers. No she wouldn't. Miko lifted her chin and tried to sound very wise. I know for a fact that the Hokage used to be a student here. Nisan was in a class 2 years behind his and saw him plenty of times. Fumi waved that away. I still say the Red Death would never let anyone teach her daughter. Miko suddenly sat straight and looked frightened. You're not supposed to say her name out loud. Fumi smiled and rolled her eyes again. I don't believe those silly stories. Here, Red Death, Red Death. You said her name 3 times. Miko looked around as though expecting someone to suddenly appear. Fumi laughed at her immature friend. And see, nothing happened. There was a sudden stir. Oh look, the Hokage is coming, and his mother is with him too. A nearby adult voice said. The 2 girls looked in the same direction as most of the other people present. Sure enough, there was the Rokudaimon and he was holding the hand of a little girl who was wearing a black bodysuit with a stripe of red along the side. On the little girl's other side was a woman in the same type of clothing with long red hair, a sword on her back, and a Hitai Ite with the image of a whirlpool. See, I told you not to say her name 3 times. Miko sounded on the verge of panic. Fumi didn't say a word but the blood drained from her face. As she watched, the Hokage patted the top of the girl's head and then walked towards the podium with a blonde kunoichi trailing a few steps behind. But what the Hokage was doing barely registered. What Fumi saw was Namikaze Kushina, the Red Death, moving in her direction. Fumi immediately looked away and tried to shrink in her seat. She forced her eyes to look straight ahead and nowhere else. Don't draw her attention, don't draw her attention, don't draw her attention. Fumi repeated the mantra again and again inside her mind and prayed desperately she could somehow avoid notice. Excuse me, but are these seats taken? She couldn't help it. She looked up towards the friendly-sounding voice. And not more than a few feet away was a smiling face with red hair and a foreign Hittite. Please don't kill me. Fumi screamed and then began to cry. XXXXXXXXXXX. The next day, Alyssa found an empty table and sat down to have lunch. Most of the other students were looking at her and whispering to one another. With a sigh, she began having the special ramen Kasen had made for her. Her first day at the academy was not going as she'd expected. To begin with, everyone else in her class had been together for 3 years. They all knew each other and they all saw her as the new kid. Add to that she was related to not only the Hokage but to Red Death. What had happened yesterday had been very upsetting, as that stupid girl had caused a scene for no reason. She couldn't believe that anyone could think such things of her mother. Big Brother gave his welcoming address but the moment had been ruined. Being fourth-year students, none of her classmates had been there, but the story had spread like wildfire. About the only good thing that had happened at the academy so far was when Iruka-sensei had administered the entrance test. She smiled proudly, recalling how impressed he'd been with her, especially her taijutsu. Uncle, grand-uncle, and Kasen had drilled crane style into her over the summer. Hinata had been nice enough to take the time to show her a few juken moves that could be incorporated. Nissen helped her with using feints to take an opponent unaware. Haku had worked with her on throwing objects with both accuracy and speed. Gabriella had shown her blocks and counters. While Enko, well, she wasn't sure when she would use low-level torture techniques, but she appreciated the time. Tayuya wasn't one for taijutsu but was teaching her all about genjutsu. The end result was a fighting style that was a bastardization of crane with various other moves incorporated into it. Iruka had been very impressed and assured her she would do very well in the weekly spars. Her academic knowledge had always been fine and she could already perform the henge, so there was no problem with chakra manipulation. She had easily passed the entrance exam. Now if only she could do something about being a social outcast. Excuse me. Alyssa was brought out of her thoughts by a young girl standing in front of her with a tray. The girl had pale eyes that were a different shade from Hinata's, dark hair that went down to her shoulders, and a seal on her forehead. She was obviously a cadet branch member of the Hyuga. Ah, yes. The girl nodded to her politely. My name is Hyuga Arena. May I sit with you? Sure. Alyssa replied. My name is Namikaze Alyssa. As she sat down, Arena grinned. I know, I've heard about you from Hinata. The girl's lips began to twitch as though she wanted to laugh. Is it true you put the Hokage's hair in braids? Alyssa smiled. Well, he wasn't the Hokage then, but yes. I thought it was a good look for him. Maybe the first day wouldn't be so bad after all. XXXXXXXXXXX. He was led through the back entrance of what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse. Once they were inside, his guide took him to a well-hidden door. They began to descend a long flight of stairs. Sai looked at him with that odd fake smile. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. My master appreciates your trust in him. Ryuki shook his head. I don't trust him, but I am willing to listen to what he has to say. At the bottom of the stairwell he was led to a large conference room. Seated at a long table were 3 people. They stood and bowed to him. Ryuki returned the gesture. Thank you, Sai, you are dismissed for now. Sai bowed. Hi, Danzo-sama. He exited the room. Ryuki slowly approached the table. It is not often I meet with 3 other council members in secret. Danzo looked completely at peace while Kaharu and Homura seemed to be ill at ease. Ryuki sat down at the table. Why have you asked me here? For now, the old ninja said. I wish only to talk. And just what should we talk about? Ryuki asked politely. Let us speak of the future, and of what is best for Konoha. XXXXXXXXXXX. Outside the warehouse a hidden figure carefully slipped away. XXXXXXXXXXX. Yamato stood in the Hokage's office in his Anbu gear and mask. He had just made an oral report and also handed Naruto a document with 109 names on it. Naruto was looking the names over and carefully committing them to memory. I didn't realize Root had grown so large. Naruto said quietly. Officially there are only 60 members in Danzo's department. I turned up the other names in my investigation. These other ninja have acted consistently in Danzo's interest even though they have no obvious ties to Root. They're Danzo's personal spies within the Anbu. Just great. With a simple jutsu he set the list on fire and it was gone. Can you tell me if the list is complete? Yamato shook his head. I am sorry Hokage-sama, but there is simply no way to know. Naruto nodded. And now Ryuki, Kaharu, and Homura are all together talking somewhere I can't see. Sarutobi had been able to use a crystal ball to personally spy out the happenings anywhere in the village. Naruto would have paid almost any price for the ability. Unfortunately he didn't know that particular jutsu. Is there any way we could put surveillance equipment in his headquarters? Yamato again shook his head. I wouldn't want to try it, that place is too well guarded. Besides knowing Danzo he probably sweeps for surveillance devices regularly. If he found something he would know he was under suspicion. Naruto was silent for a moment. You know what? I should just call the four of them into my office and ask them. It would be worth it just to see the look on their faces. Even though he had a mask on, Naruto could tell Yamato was blanching. I'm just kidding. This is nothing to joke about. Root and the Uchiha clan plotting is extremely serious. I know that. The problem is I don't know what the hell to do about it. If they were foreign nin I'd have them killed or sent to Ibiki. If I had any evidence against them I'd have them arrested. As it is if I move against them without any evidence of their guilt half the village would be up in arms. Treason is treason no matter who commits it. Yamato said, flatly. Oh I agree, but if I have the head of the Uchiha clan or one of our most respected Anbu leaders arrested without proof people will think it's personal. Even worse, they might think I'm making a bid to eliminate opposition to gain more power. A hand's mission could solve this. Yamato said quietly. Naruto shook his head. I am not going to start ordering assassinations within this village. I am not going to become like the Tsuchikage. Whatever happens I will deal with it like a Hokage. Beneath the Anbu mask Yamato frowned. Can I at least ask to bring Kakashi-senpai into the investigation? Naruto shook his head. No. As of right now you, me, and Jiraiya are the only ones who know about this. I want to keep it that way for now. Don't you trust Kakashi? Yamato sounded surprised. I trust Nissen with my life, same as with my mother or Hinata or Shikamaru. It has nothing to do with trust. Danzo and Ryuki are both very intelligent and Danzo is especially cautious when it comes to security. The more people investigating the more likely it is to be noticed. For right now I prefer to rely on you. Hi Hokage-sama. XXXXXXXXXX. Outside his office window it began to rain. Naruto noticed and thought things looked miserable. XXXXXXXXXX. Hundreds of miles away it was also raining. Soshiku approached the bodies of the two ninja he'd just killed. They'd had on black cloaks with red clouds. He supposed they were the Akatsuki that the Hokage had warned him about. He was willing to admit they were probably more powerful than Iwa hunter nins. But lightning killed them like anyone else. He stood over their lifeless charred corpses. You should have just left me alone. Suddenly the one with the mask lifted his arm and it shot out. The arm's hand gripped Soshiku's neck tight. Now Hidan, Kakuzu shouted. To Soshiku's horror the other, body, suddenly jumped up to his feet. He threw a weird three-bladed scythe that cut deep into his right thigh. Hidan retrieved his weapon with a laugh. You're fucked. He licked the blood off one of the blades. Now I'll begin the ritual. Howling Soshiku finally tore off the hand's iron grip and leaped back. He was suddenly scared. He had never before run into anyone who could survive multiple lightning strikes. He let the red chakra flow around him. His body began transforming. He didn't like resorting to this, the transformation was always painful and when he did this he always wound up eating whatever he killed. He howled at the pain. Hair began to cover him, his bones cracked as he grew a foot taller, his muscles hardened and expanded, His mouth jutted forward and his eyes sloped back, his teeth sharpened and his hands were claws. In short order he'd turned himself into a monster, a very hungry monster. You survived my lightning, he spoke in a bestial growl. Can you survive being torn apart? Usually, when he said that even the most hardened ninja would run for their lives or begin begging for mercy, he had never before been laughed at. The one with the side had changed his look. His face was now mostly black and he seemed to be standing within a ritual circle. He took a long metal spike out. You've been a fucking bad boy. He drove the spike into his own chest. Now play dead. Soshiku was about to leap when it suddenly felt as though someone had stabbed him through the heart. He spat out blood and staggered a couple steps forward before pitching to the ground unconscious. The red chakra disappeared and his body soon transformed back to human. Kakuzu quickly checked to make sure he was still alive. Kakuzu nodded. We got him, the leader should be very happy. Whatever, Hidan said without interest. Now I must perform the ritual and beg Jashin's forgiveness for not killing the stupid fuck. Kakuzu repressed a sigh. So far as he was concerned the ritual was nothing but a waste of time. But he knew better than to try and argue about it. He sat down and relaxed. XXXXXXXXXX. 3 days later, Soshiku's lifeless corpse was discarded and dropped to the ground. Pain's astral image nodded. 7 down 1 to go. Chapter 90. 13 years ago. The 5-year-old girl stood rigidly at attention. She had just woken up and was dressed in a simply gray nightshirt. She stood barefoot on the cold stone floor. She was cold and still tired, but she knew better than to say anything. In front of her was the man who controlled her every waking moment. He decided everything for her, from what she would wear to what she would eat to when she would be allowed to go outside. Junsaku-sensei was dressed in his normal Anbu armor and uniform. And as he normally did he had on his mask. All the Anbu had masks in the form of demons or monsters. Junsaku's mask was of a red devil with a frowning mouth and 2 small horns. She thought it fitting as he never seemed to ever be in a happy mood. What are you? He asked, beginning the morning ritual. A weapon, she replied without a second's thought. She was so used to this she could have spoken his lines as well as her own without missing a beat. What is your purpose? To strike down enemies. Who do you serve? The Raikage and the village hidden within the clouds. Would you die in the service of the Raikage and this village? Yes, for I live only to serve and protect the Raikage and the village. Do you fear death? No, for death is no more than a part of life. It is as natural to die as it is to be born. What is it you fear then? Failure and dishonor. Are you happy? Her mouth opened and suddenly snapped shut again. He had never asked that before. Well, there was annoyance in his voice but she could not read anything else. She swallowed. Forgive me Junsaku-sensei, but I do not know how I am supposed to answer that question. I have not been instructed. Junsaku-sensei shook his head slightly. That is because it is a genuine question. I am not looking for a scripted reply but for information. You need only answer the question truthfully. She looked at him nervously. Will I be punished if I give the wrong answer? He shook his head slightly. For this sort of question there is no right or wrong answer. You may give one answer today and a different one tomorrow and both would be correct so long as they were each the truth at the time. Do you understand? She nodded ever so slightly. I think so. There was a long pause. Well then, are you happy? She thought about it very carefully. Not about whether or not she was actually happy, the answer to that was always no. But rather she tried to piece together what he wanted her to answer. She knew he was lying when he said there was no right or wrong answer. Just as she knew no one cared whether she was happy or not. Everything in her life was a test. Every action and every word was watched and judged. A fact that had forced to develop a sharp mind and even sharper senses. She made her decision and nodded. Yes Junsaku-sensei, I am happy. He nodded once in acknowledgement and gave no other reaction. You have 45 minutes to wash yourself and dress. I have already set aside the clothes you will be wearing. I expect you to be seated at the table for breakfast in exactly 45 minutes. He made a hand sign and disappeared in a swirl of wind and fog. Sighing she got moving to the bathroom, another day had begun. XXXXXXXXXXX. 12 years ago. The 6-year-old was walking through the streets of the village a couple steps behind Junsaku-sensei. On the rooftops and side. Streets. Two full squads of Anbu kept watch on their progress while trying to remain discreet. They were all but invisible to the villagers, but with her vision and sense of smell she had no trouble keeping track of them. She was allowed to train outside in the compound daily, but actually going through the village was a rarity. Everyone knew who she was. As she and her sensei came down the street, people ran to the other side. All conversations came to an abrupt halt as people stopped to stare at her. Their looks held curiosity and surprise and distaste, but above all they looked at her with fear. Junsaku-sensei, she spoke quietly. He did not break his stride but turned his head back to her a little. Yes, why is everyone afraid of me? She couldn't see his face of course, but somehow she got the sense that he looked uncomfortable. People will always fear what they do not understand. That is human nature. Before she could ask what exactly he meant by that, he turned away and picked up his pace a bit. Come, we cannot keep the Yondaime Raikage waiting. XXXXXXXXXXX. Standing in the reception area, everyone around her tried to pretend she wasn't there. They weren't very good at it. She could see the secretaries and other civilians constantly glancing and then looking away. Normally with the Anbu there was always a trace amount of fear scent, even with Junsaku-sensei. Here the stink of fear was so thick she thought she might begin to choke on it. It was actually a relief to see the Raikage's office door open and Junsaku motioning her to come. As she approached the door, Junsaku bent down and whispered in her ear. Behave exactly as I showed you, and do not speak unless spoken to. Her answer was a quick and silent nod. She strode in the office and came to a stop 5 feet in front of the Raikage's desk. She gave him a deep and very respectful bow. Anbu trainee ni Yugito reporting as ordered, Raikage-sama. He gave a slight nod in acknowledgement. Sitting behind his desk he carefully looked her over. Whatever he was thinking he hid it well. He had a lot of fear scent. His lips were turned down, but that didn't surprise her. People rarely smiled around her. So you are Yugito, the Raikage said neutrally. You are a very special little girl. Do you know why you are special? She noticed Junsaku stiffened just a bit. No, Raikage-sama, she answered truthfully. Again the Raikage seemed to study her. He came to a decision. You are aware of the seal written on your back. Hi Raikage-sama. You are what is known as a Jinchuriki. That seal was placed on you on the day of your birth so that a powerful demon could be locked inside you. And with those few words all semblance or order left her world. What? She felt a sudden mounting terror. Horrid images of a monster tearing her apart from the inside out filled her mind. You hold within you a demon, the Raikage repeated with great patience. To be precise, you hold the two-tailed demon cat, Nibi. Because of this you will one day have great power. Power you will use in service to this village. Despite her shock, her discipline held, if only just barely. Hi Raikage-sama. XXXXXXXXXXX. She was sitting on her bed with her knees drawn up and her arms wrapped around them. She was shaking and she was crying. She had a monster inside of her. A monster that had been put in her on purpose. She was so scared. There was a single knock and the door opened. Junsaku never asked or needed permission to enter her quarters. Even the knock was just done out of courtesy. Junsaku entered and shut the door behind him. He strode over to her bed and crossed his arms over his chest. Why are you crying? He asked sharply. You are being taught to be ninja. For a ninja to cry is shameful. What is the 25th rule of ninja conduct? Yugito quickly wiped her eyes and tried to bring her crying to a stop. No matter what happens, true shinobi must never show their emotions. The mission is the only priority. Carry that in your heart and never shed a tear. So stop your crying. He sat down on the edge of her bed. You have no cause for tears. Her head snapped back up so she could stare at his mask. What? I have a demon inside me. She could feel the panic rising up in her. Junsaku sighed and reached up to pull off his devil mask. The face he revealed was not a handsome one. It was the face of a man in his 50s who had seen and done many things and survived. His nose was large and stubby and his chin seemed to jut out too far. Wrinkles covered his face and there was a small scar just beneath his left eye. His hair was mostly gray but still with some blonde. The eyes were a surprise. They were a beautiful grayish blue. They held a startling clarity, as though nothing could ever fool them. When Junsaku-sensei looked at her without the mask on, she was always drawn to his eyes and always felt they could see straight through to her heart. So, he asked calmly. That was true yesterday as well. It has been true for your entire life. All that has changed is that you are now aware of it. Thinking about it that way did help a little, but only a little. What will happen to me? What will the demon do to me? Nothing, he said. So long as the seal is active and you do not voluntarily choose to release the Nibi, the demon cannot harm or control you. A look of worry crossed his face. Though it seems likely the demon will be able to talk to you. Talk to me. She had images of a huge scaly beast with sharp claws and a mouth filled with pointy teeth hulking over her. Junsaku nodded. That is right, the demon will be able to speak to you within your mind. You may expect all sorts of threats and demands that you release the seal. But keep in mind that the demon cannot harm or control you unless you allow it to. It can't hurt me. She sounded doubtful. It cannot. Junsaku said firmly. The demon is the prisoner and you are its jailer. It would have been pointless to implant the demon in you if it were to control you. Why was it? She asked. Why was this done to me? He tried not to show it, but his eyes held sympathy for her and she could smell his concern. It was done so that you could one day use the demon's power to protect the village. You know that in the Third Great Ninja War that much of our country was overrun and this village nearly destroyed. She nodded, she knew all about her village's history. It is to make sure that such a thing can never happen again that the Nibi was placed into you. Surviving in this world demands strength and sacrifice. All lightning nin are expected to make whatever sacrifice is required for the good of the village. In that Yugito you are no different than me or any other ninja. We are all tools in the service of the Reikage and the village. She slowly nodded. I understand, she said quietly. I am a weapon and I live only to serve. She looked at him questioningly. Will the people I protect always be afraid of me? Yes, he told her truthfully. I told you that it was human nature to always fear what one does not understand. But perhaps in time some of them will lose their fear of you. Will you? She asked longingly. He saw her pain and reached out a hand to try and comfort her. But before he touched her he stopped. She understood. I see, she looked away from him. She could smell his fear, it was faint, but it was there. He quickly put his mask back on and stood up. I know this has been hard for you, but I still expect you to behave like a future Anbu operative. No more tears. A ninja crying is a disgrace. She nodded but refused to look at him. I understand, sensei. Very well, you may have the rest of the day to yourself. With that he quickly departed. When she turned back around he was gone. On her bed were 10 boxes of strawberry pocky. Despite everything she smiled a little. Pocky was her favorite thing in the world. Whenever she did really well in a lesson or in training, Junsaku would reward her with a box. He had never given her more than a single box at a time though. Having him lavish so much of the delicious treat on her at once seemed almost decadent. She tore open one of the boxes and took out one of the thin bread sticks with strawberry icing. She was smiling because she was getting to have a whole lot of her precious pocky. She was also smiling because this was Junsaku sensei's way of saying he cared without ever saying it. XXXXXXXXXXX. What are you? A weapon. What is your purpose? To strike down enemies. Are you happy? XXXXXXXXXXX. 11 years ago, she was in a large underground chamber. A massive containment seal had been drawn up on the floor in the shape of a circle. The symbols glowed with a cheerful green energy. All around the perimeter of the seal sat 8 Anbu carefully maintaining the seal. She sat in a wooden chair at the very center of the seal with Junsaku sensei. Try it once more. Junsaku told her. Hi sensei. She shut her eyes and concentrated. 9 sets of eyes watched her nervously. She reached down into herself and tried to draw out the power. She found it, hidden somewhere deep inside. But bringing it out was difficult, like drawing water from a very deep well. Nevertheless she had her orders and so tried. Like the others in the room he felt it, just the tiniest flicker of that power. From out of her hands and arms a tiny film of red chakra began oozing out. Only suddenly to disappear as quickly as it had come. She opened her eyes and let out a weary breath. I'm sorry Junsaku sensei. But that's as much as I can do. I see, Junsaku frowned. Perhaps we're going about this the wrong way. Even after all these months of training you're still barely able to scratch the surface of your potential. Let us try something different. I want you to take on a meditative state and see if you can contact the demon. There were gasps not only from her but from the other Anbu as well. You want me to talk to the demon? He nodded. I do. It is in the demon's own interest to give you power. If you appeal to its own sense of self-preservation, it may be willing to aid you. She looked extremely nervous. But what if? The demon cannot hurt you, Yugito. There is no reason to not make the attempt. She swallowed. Hi Junsaku-sensei. XXXXXXXXXX. She let herself fall deeply into the meditative state. She found herself in a peaceful forest. The air was thick with the scent of flowers and other plants. The sky above her was a tranquil blue without a cloud anywhere. In spite of the idyllic scene, she looked about nervously, wondering if somewhere in the forest the demon was watching her. Meow. She looked down to see a little gray house cat looking up at her with green eyes. Around the cat's neck was a leather collar. Oh, what an adorable kitty. She immediately picked the cat up and soon had the cat held with one arm against her chest as she pet the cat with her other hand. The cat soon had eyes closed and was purring, sounding very content. She leaned down and rubbed her cheek against the top of the cat's head. The fur was so soft. Looking closely, she noticed the leather collar. Do you belong to someone? The cat opened both eyes and looked up at her. She laughed. Well, since this isn't real, I guess you belong to me. I think I'll call you Precious. My name is Nibby. Ah! She screamed and immediately dropped the cat. She leapt back about 10 feet and pulled out a kunai. The cat meanwhile landed on all 4 feet. Nibby turned in her direction and sat down. What had seemed like a single tail turned out to be 2. Both tails curled around Nibby's paws as the cat calmly watched the terrified girl. Is something wrong? You're the demon, she cried out. The cat's head tilted a bit. Well, of course I am. Who else would I be? Yugito stood there eyeing this seemingly harmless cat while still holding her kunai. Are you going to try and eat me? I have eaten humans, but I don't really like them, too fatty. I like fish. All right, this wasn't what she had expected. Since you're a demon, do you plan on hurting me? No, why would I hurt you? Because you're a demon. Yes, we have established that. I am a demon, now why do you think I would hurt you? She stared at the cat that was staring at her. She found the whole situation very, very bizarre. Isn't that what demons do? Humans. She could hear playful laughter. For such short-lived and fragile creatures, you really believe you know everything, don't you? There was more laughter. Listen carefully, not all demons are alike. Some, like Kyuubi or Shukaku, revel in killing and destruction. Some simply enjoy existing in their animal form. I usually enjoy just being a cat, and occasionally taking vengeance on people. Vengeance, Yugito said weakly. That's right. I am a spirit of vengeance and I enjoy bloody revenge upon those who have committed some terrible wrong. I also really like just lying out in the sun. I see, so are you going to take vengeance on me for holding you prisoner? No, you had no choice in that. You are as much of a victim as I am. So what happens now? Well, you could remove my collar. Despite the strange situation, Yugito's mind was still sharp. The collar, it symbolizes the seal that holds you, doesn't it? That's right. Yugito shook her head. In that case, I'm afraid I can't remove it. My main duty to the Raikage and the village is to keep you imprisoned. Well, in that case, can you pet me? Yugito shook her head, not believing any of this. The terrible and evil demon that everyone was so scared of wanted to be petted. You want me to pet you? Well, of course. I enjoy it. Deciding this had to be the strangest moment in her very strange life, she nodded and put the kunai away. All right. She came over, knelt down and began petting the fearsome demon Nibby. The cat began to purr happily. Since you don't seem to want to harm me, can I ask you something? I will allow you to use my chakra. How did you? Yugito heard more good-natured laughter. We share the same body and mind through the seal. Everything you know I know. And just to save time, no, I can't hurt or control you unless you allow it, and yes, when you die I die, so I will do whatever I can to protect you. Thank you, Nibby. You are welcome, Yugito. XXXXXXXXXX. She opened her eyes and smiled up at her sensei. I did it, I talked to Nibby. The other Anbu began whispering to each other. Junsaku merely nodded. And what did it say? Her. What? The Nibby, she explained. As a girl, she said I could use her chakra and that she would try and protect me. I see. Junsaku said neutrally. Well, in that case, why don't you try and draw the demon's chakra once more? Certain she would be able to do it this time, she decided to milk the opportunity. Sensei, if I manage to draw the red chakra, can I have a special reward? When she did especially well, she would ask him for specific things as rewards. What would you like? Previous requests had been for stuffed toys and her own radio and CD player. Will you take me through the village and buy me lunch at a restaurant? Yes, I will, he nodded. But you will have to draw a noticeable amount and hold it for a while. Hi sensei. She immediately concentrated on drawing out the red chakra. Where before it had been like drawing water from a deep well, now it was like standing before a geyser. The red chakra flowed out. There were shouts of alarm from the others, and even Junsaku took an involuntary step back. Little Yugito had not only drawn the red chakra, she had fully transformed into a 10-foot-tall mini Nibi composed of it. The sense of power and of evil was overwhelming. Junsaku had felt this only once before. Mercifully, it was a mere fraction of what the demon had been able to produce. Are you happy, sensei? It was Yugito's voice, but it had a deeper tone to it. Junsaku quickly nodded. Yes, very well done, Yugito. The test is complete now. Please let the power go. She immediately complied, and a smiling 7-year-old was standing in front of him again. XXXXXXXXXXX. Unlike previous trips through the village, they were leaping across the rooftops. Yugito loved the village and wanted to protect it. At the same time, she didn't like the way people would look at her. So she had asked to travel across the roofs rather than along the street. They remained hidden from view. As they were passing through a neighborhood, she suddenly came to a halt. Something had caught her attention. Junsaku was forced to stop as well. He was surprised to see her standing near the edge of a roof. What is it? What are they doing? She pointed down to a group of 4 girls that were near Yugito's age. 2 of the girls were swinging a long rope around and around. The other 2 leaping up and down each time the rope approached the ground. What sort of training is this? This is not training, Yugito. These children are civilians, they are simply playing. Playing? Do you mean like what I do with my toys? She asked. That's right. She looked at the girls. They seemed to be having a great deal of fun. As she continued to watch, though, one of the girls tripped as she landed and fell over. This brought the playing to a halt as the child began crying. What was worse, she was crying where others could see. Shameful, Yugito remarked. That girl is crying, it's shameful. Yugito clarified. She is not a ninja in training, Yugito. For an ordinary child there is no shame in tears. Junsaku explained. A woman came out of the building the children had been playing in front of. She quickly went over to the fallen girl and wrapped her arms around her. Soon the girl had stopped crying. What is that woman doing? Yugito asked. That is called a hug. It is a way to show care and affection for someone. Junsaku answered a bit sadly. Yugito continued to stare down at the scene, fascinated by the sight of a mother holding her child. XXXXXXXXXXX. At the restaurant, people stared as the 2 of them entered. No one said anything directly, but as usual there were whispers. Yugito did her best to ignore them and the fierce scent. She absolutely loved fish and had some baked salmon with rice. Junsaku did not eat much himself but had 4 small bottles of sake. Yugito noticed. Do you always drink so much? Junsaku had of course removed his mask in order to eat. She saw his annoyed expression. You do not need to worry, it would take a lot more than this to leave me drunk. Why do you drink so much? He paused. It is medicine for the soul. He lifted his cup to his mouth and downed it. Will I drink like this when I am a ninja? He looked at her. Kami, I hope not. He quickly refilled his cup and had another drink. XXXXXXXXXXX. What are you? A weapon. What is your purpose? To strike down enemies. Are you happy? XXXXXXXXXXX. 8 years ago, they were on a wooded hillside a few miles from the village. Yugito was excited. Not only was this her initiation into the ranks of the Anbu, but it was the first time in her life she had ever been allowed outside the village. She had trained long and hard to master taijutsu, ninjutsu, weapons, and control of her demonic chakra. It had been very lonely at times. The only people she was around on a regular basis were the Anbu. They were comrades and co-workers, but not really friends. She had no friends, except perhaps Nibi. The only person in the world she was close to was her sensei, and even that relationship had a certain distance in it. She was eager to finally become full Anbu and a real ninja. She would be allowed to get her very own apartment and no longer be confined to Anbu headquarters most of the time. She would get to go on real missions and see the world. She would actually get to have a little bit of freedom. Junsaku looked at her very seriously from beneath his mask. Normally Yugito, you would have had to have achieved the rank of Jonin and had years of field experience to even be considered for the Anbu. He sighed. But you are the most special of special exceptions, and so if you pass tonight's test we will welcome you into our ranks. I am ready for whatever test you have. Yugito said confidently. We will see. Junsaku looked into the darkened woods. Bring him out. From out of the nearby trees came two Anbu with a chained prisoner held firmly between them. The prisoner was gagged and was looking about the clearing, obviously terrified. Yugito was very surprised to see the man in ninja clothing and gear. Prisoners were usually forced to wear brown sackcloth. Even more surprising, she saw he had on a mist hite. Junsaku approached the prisoner with a key in hand. We will give you a 2-minute head start. If we catch you we will kill you. He grabbed hold of the man's wrists and quickly unlocked his cuffs and chains. He then stepped quickly back. Let him go. The other two Anbu released him. The man hesitated for just a second and looked about wildly, obviously thinking this some sort of trick. He quickly decided that he was wasting precious time and leapt away as fast as he could. Junsaku-sensei, what are you doing? That man is a spy from Mist. He was captured in our territory trying to steal one of our code books. He is a chunin and should be no match for an Anbu. He glanced at his watch. In 1 minute and 40 seconds you are going to go out alone and kill him. Kill him, she said dully. Junsaku turned to her. What are you? A weapon, she answered automatically. What is your purpose? To strike down enemies. For the first time in a long while she really heard what she was saying. Did you think those were just words? If you really do become Anbu, then a weapon is what you'll be, and this is exactly the sort of mission you will be expected to carry out. You will go alone, track him down, kill him, and return his hite as proof. If you should fail we will have to call out the hunter nins to try and prevent him from making it back to Mist. And should you fail it will mean you are not ready to be a ninja. She stood straight and gritted her teeth. I will not fail, sensei. Junsaku looked back down at his watch. Time seemed to crawl by until after an hour or more he looked back up at her. Go. She leapt away and was gone. XXXXXXXXXXX. Even with a full moon out she relied mostly on scent to track him. It had turned out that he was pretty fast, a bit faster than she was. He was heading west away from the village and the roads. He might have studied the geography of lightning as he was headed into the most rugged and hilly part of the country. The terrain would give him his best chance to lose pursuit. But unfortunately for him there were no wide rivers in this part of lightning. And even if he was faster she knew she would outlast him. Her endurance was inhuman, literally, she could go days without a rest. After 3 hours of going all out he was finally forced to rest. That was when she caught up to him. XXXXXXXXXXX. It was almost sunrise when she finally returned. She handed a bloodied mist hite over to her sensei without a word. How was it? He asked her. He saw her look away and tremble a bit. Hard, she answered without detail. It gets easier, before long it won't bother you at all. She looked back at him. Really? Is that why you drink so much? Because it doesn't bother you at all. I drink for many reasons. Here, he held out a lightning hite and an Anbu mask with a cat demon's image. You are now ninja and Anbu of the village hidden within the clouds. She took both items from him. Thank you, sensei. I am very proud of you, Yugito. His words made her blush with pride. Sensei, may I ask for a special reward? Yes, what would you like? She gave him a shy look. A hug. He stared back at her. I am not the hugging sort. Oh, she looked down feeling foolish. I understand, but how about we go back to the village and I will buy you all the pocky you want. She looked back up at him and smiled a bit. All right. XXXXXXXXXXX. Are you happy? XXXXXXXXXX. 5 years ago, being an Anbu had not changed her life as much as she had hoped. She had her own apartment and her own money. She got to decide what she ate and what she wore and had as much freedom as any ninja. But she was still lonely most of the time. Like Gaara in Suna or Naruto in Konoha, everyone in her village knew who she was. Unlike the two of them, she was never attacked or insulted or threatened. Whatever else she was Anbu, and you did not disrespect the Anbu. But if no one ever insulted her, no one ever approached her as a friend either. Also, unlike the Jinchuriki in other villages, her existence was not kept secret. The Raikage let the world know that his village possessed the power of the two-tailed demon. It not only acted as a deterrent to potential enemies but brought in many high-paying contracts. Yugito was kept very busy with training and with missions. She was never assigned a team. Once in a while she would work with Junsaku. Most of the time she was solo. She received only A and S-ranked missions. Many of them involving assassination or something else of high risk and difficulty. She did not object as the missions allowed her to travel and provided her with real challenges. In her foreign missions she had met a few interesting people and enjoyed the respite from always being feared. But she was never in any one place for more than a few days, and she was not the sort of person to approach others first. Her life was not all that she hoped for, but she was more or less satisfied. Even if she was lonely. Then she returned from a mission to Grass to be informed Junsaku was in the hospital dying of liver failure and asking for her. XXXXXXXXXXX. He had always seemed so huge to her. She had always thought of him as large and powerful, as unstoppable as a landslide. Now he was lying in a hospital bed, pale and sweaty. He suddenly seemed horribly frail to her. Despite his weakness, he smiled up at her. "Hello Yugito, thank you for coming to see me. Sensei, what happened?" He chuckled. "All the sake over all those years finally caught up to me. The medic nins can do nothing for me. I do not have very long to live." He could see the misery in her eyes. "Do not grieve for me, I have had a full life and I do not fear death. Death is no more than a part of life. It is as natural to die as it is to be born," she said blankly. He nodded. "Yes, and it is pointless to fear what must be." He took a deep breath and with some effort forced himself up into a sitting position. "But before I die there are things I must say to you. I have had many regrets Yugito, many things I have been ashamed of. And one of the things I regret most was how I treated you." "Sensei, what are you talking about? You are the only one who ever treated me well." He shook his head sadly. "No, I could have given you love, but I was always afraid to. I have always seen it as a weakness for a ninja. And knowing what your life was going to be like, I thought it best not to expose you to that. I thought it best that you learn to find satisfaction in duty and not in people. And I was afraid I did not have it in me to love a child. But now I know I was wrong." He reached out and put his arms around her. She stiffened, she was not used to having anyone touch her. But slowly she relaxed and accepted his hug. "All those times I asked you if you were happy and you said, yes, I knew you were lying. But I convinced myself that you weren't. I wanted to pretend that you weren't lonely and unhappy. I wasn't brave enough to be a father to you, and for that I beg your forgiveness." She felt the comfort of finally being embraced by the one person she truly cared for. "I can't forgive because you never did anything wrong. I know that you cared about me even if your way of showing it was to buy me Pocky. Every single time you gave me some or spent time with me I knew it was your way of showing you cared." She hesitated. "Junsaku-sensei, may I call you father?" He smiled and nodded without letting go of her. "I would like that Yugito-chan." Father, the word sounded so alien to her, but it felt wonderful to say. Despite her best efforts she felt tears. She immediately felt ashamed of showing such weakness. "Forgive me, I should not be crying." He looked at her and then gently shook his head. "It is all right. If you feel the need to cry, then cry. I know how strong you are and it honors me to know you weep for my sake." His comforting words only made her cry harder. She put her own arms around him and squeezed tight. "Oh father, please don't leave me. I am sorry Yugito, but that is not my choice. But whatever time I have left I would like to spend with you." XXXXXXXXXXX. He held on for 5 days. During that time she refused to leave his side. She was actually assigned an A-ranked mission which she refused. In the village hidden within the clouds, ninja did not have the right to refuse any mission. No one had the courage to tell her she had to go. In those 5 days she and her father talked and talked and talked, trying to make up for years of things that had been left unsaid. For this very short time Yugito thought she understood what it was like to be loved. Near the very end Junsaku's skin had become almost yellowish and his pulse had slowed and he was constantly sweating and in pain. But he was ninja and kept his dignity to the very last. "Daughter," he whispered into her ear. "I want you to be truly happy someday. You deserve that, and you deserve to be loved. Promise me something, that if you find love and happiness one day that you will not turn away from it. Not even if it conflicts with your duty. That went directly into the teeth of everything he had taught her. But there was no way she could refuse. I give you my solemn promise, Tucson, if I find love and happiness someday I will not turn from it. With that Junsaku closed his eyes and found peace. XXXXXXXXXXX. 5 months ago, she had never been to Konoha before. She arrived at the main gate, where a pair of chunin asked to see her documents. She presented them, along with a letter of invitation from the Hokage. She had no idea what the mission was or how long it would last, but she would perform it to the best of her abilities, just like always. It was not hard to figure out where the Hokage would be. The Hokage Tower being hard to miss. In the years since Junsaku's death she had given up thoughts of finding love or happiness. For someone like her such thoughts were just foolish. She soon arrived at the Hokage's office and was greeted by his assistant. The Hokage has been looking forward to meeting you. Shizune said. I look forward to meeting him as well. She politely lied. If he was anything like the Raikage he would be a frowning and unhappy man who was fearful and distrustful. At least the meeting would be short. She would be informed of who her client was and the nature of the mission. Shizune waved her into the Hokage's office. Her very first impression was shock. Standing in front of her was a teenager who really looked like he was playing dress up in the robes of state. More bizarre still, he was smiling at her. Well, whatever her impressions, he was obviously the Hokage, and so she gave him a respectful bow. I am Yugito of the village hidden within the clouds. I was ordered to report to you about a long-term mission. The blonde teen stood up and returned her bow. I am very glad to meet you, Yugito. I hope we can become good friends. Her eyebrows quirked for just a second before the calm mask returned. Friends. What sort of cage would say such a thing? She wondered if he was some sort of an imposter playing the role as a security measure. Even if he was, she couldn't call him on it. That would be rude. Well, I suppose that is possible. She said neutrally. Can you please inform me of who my client is and what the mission is? The blonde smiled. I am your client. I gave the Raikage 5 million ryu of my family's money to hire you as a bodyguard for a full year. She stared at him. A year. The Raikage sent me away for an entire year. Welcome to Konoha. She just stared at him and got the weirdest feeling that this was going to be a very interesting mission. Thank you for watching. Please remember, make sure to like and subscribe, and if you have fanfictions you would like to see on the channel, leave them in the comments, and have a great day.